Wonderful. And yeah, I just started recording. So, Josh Converse, welcome back to the 38th episode of the Mental Breakthrough.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Yes. And although, as last time, we'll have a conversation that may lead wherever it goes, we're going to focus on the book that you sent me, which I appreciate greatly. And I saw the cost of sending stuff via mail and everything, and then the cost of the books, of course. The Truth and Beauty by Andrew Klavan.
Klavan.
So that is kind of the uh yeah, where some of my thoughts kind of will spawn from. I did send you a list of things that I hope to somewhat dive into, but like you said, each one of those are kind of deep and could do an entire dissertation on it.
We could, yeah. So we'll just see where we get to, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so I want to I guess I'll start off kind of in a sense just responding to some things that I came across here that they may or may not be your views. So I don't
Yeah,
know.
can that's all right. But before we even get
Yeah,
there, can we
sure,
just set it up a little bit?
sure. Yeah.
So during our last conversation, I think we found some places where we agree and we found some places where we differ, but I thought it was a very reasonable, respectful talk. And I think in some ways we got somewhere.
Hmm.
And I said, can I send you a couple of books that I think might be interesting around that conversation, which got pretty metaphysical. It was a philosophical discussion and it definitely touched on metaphysics. Why is there something instead of nothing? Why is there a moral dimension to the universe in the sense that we agree that it's better to give a beggar bread than it is to kick a dog, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
why should that be? Um, and so these are the biggest questions there are in some sense. And it put me in mind of this book by Andrew Klavan, The Truth and Beauty. And when it came out, it appeals to English majors like me. He's a novelist by trade. But the subtitle is How the Lives and Works of England's Greatest Poets Point the Way to a Deeper Understanding of the Words of Jesus. Now, it happens that you and I had an English class together many years ago, or a couple of English classes in high school that were pretty formative for both of us, I think.
Mhm.
And we did touch on the Romantic poets, and that's who obviously Klavan's writing about, the Romantics. And in his book, the thesis is essentially that in a moment very like our own, these poets emerged and they sort of took what were those Enlightenment values that were pointing toward a kind of materialism and a kind of secularism and took the gospels and the ideas in the romantic poetry idiom and tried to transform those into a new way of going forward with ancient wisdom
Mhm.
into a new age. And Klavan's thesis is that that's where we are now in many ways, right? So I thought
Yeah.
that's a good fit for our continuing discussion. And so I sent you this book and a couple of others that we can talk about maybe another time. But so that's teed up. You've read it. I'm fascinated to hear, what your thoughts are on some of this and uh, what it made you think about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely I see the parallel as he uh specifically points out, but also sometimes not just he kind of laid it out in a way that yeah, our time right now, there are these same um kind of yeah, they're philosophical issues about morality, about politics. There's this political thing that isn't necessary, but because we live in a society and there has to be some order that there is, I feel that um is similar to what uh some of this time that he was specifically
Definitely,
talking.
yeah, the radicalism of the French
Yeah, yeah,
Revolution and things
yeah,
like that, right?
yeah,
Versus the sort of the woke, tear down statues and change language and sort of the same ideas
yeah,
that
yeah,
were emergent in the French Revolution,
yeah,
which of course began with a legitimate grievance. The aristocracy did have its boot on the neck of the common people such that there wasn't enough food, and then gathered steam into a place where it was just, let's behead everybody.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I think a lot of the impulses that we have today, where we say, well, we want to have people of different races to be treated uh, with equal respect and equal opportunity, and I think that's a perfectly fair thing to want, and a laudable goal. And then to turn that into, well, we want equity, and actually we're going to favor people who are, quote, traditionally underrepresented, unquote. And that this is, I think Klavan's accurately diagnosing that, like the French Revolution, this is moving into an excessive place. Like you have a point, and then it goes someplace that gets real dark. Like we're going to start discriminating again, but just in different directions.
Yeah, and I see it already in I'm as I'm reading this and as I'm living at present
Right.
and applying this, so it is fun as I was doing that. I do have uh, I'm also looking at, okay, I sometimes I jump back really far and think, okay, I actually feel like it's possible we could easily continue to go down this radicalism.
There are many who would like us to.
There
Yeah,
are many who would like us to, and there is a push, but at the same time, I do see a big counter, such as books
I
like
do
this
too.
and people and podcasters and just people that you have conversations with.
Right.
And so part of this discussion, I hope, is also just looking at the, okay, how can we prevent a something that would go too far in
Yeah.
opposing this, and it's I feel like I said, I felt partly responsible for some of these ideas, these radical ideas. I would have considered
Sure.
myself a proponent of these radical ideas a couple decades ago or something. And
Sure.
I'm thinking like, okay, so I want to think, okay, how could have this been prevented? But at the same time, how can we prevent it from, um, because in some ways, I guess is so let's talk about like the diversity of ideas and not one common argument, and I see and I agree with, is that we need, and especially with you in the academic arena, I mean, represented, on a campus specifically, I don't know, but generally we can agree that campuses are largely liberal, and a big argument for conservatives are to it. Sometimes I hear things that I actually sound like the same thing that the radicals are asking for, and that's this, like, we need diversity of whatever they're asking for diversity of.
Right.
And then you're like, well, wait, hold on, you're doing all these equity type things, and then diversity of thought is not in there. But how can we make sure that there is? And I absolutely think we do need more conservative views in academics. But
Sure.
how do we achieve that without doing the exact same thing that they were doing with equity? Like how can we do we require that you need this amount of number of conservatives to be hired?
Yeah.
And
So no, no, I don't think that's what you do. um, uh, I'm not being trite. I really think that the way that you get a quality education, which is what college is supposed to be, is by trying to get at the truth. Therefore, if you have postmodernist professors who say there's no objective truth, everything is just a mask for power, well, the thing to ask would be, is that true?
Mhm,
If
mhm.
that's true, then there is truth. And if it's not true, then what you've said doesn't mean anything. So obviously there is such a thing as truth. It's not all a mask for power, unless you're saying everything I do for power, in which case you're a sociopath and you shouldn't be in charge of anything. So the whole thing is undergirded by this system of, and you can talk about thinkers like Michel Foucault or Jacques Derrida, like it's mostly these linguistic philosophers, French generally, although Derrida's Algerian, but from French Algeria, and he's Jewish. But you take all of these thinkers, and even Nietzsche, who says, I don't think prescriptively, but descriptively, we've killed God in Europe in the 19th century. Well, who do you put in your place? Who do you put in his place? Well, generally yourself. I'll worship me. I'll worship my power and my ideas. And that's, in the old way of speaking about it, satanic. And it's going to end badly. And I think it is ending badly. I think that we're not educating people very well in this country at present, largely because these ideas are anti-truth ideas. They're not looking for truth. They're denying truth and on the run from it. And so to the extent that, like, it doesn't really bother me. You go to a class and there's a liberal, you go to a class and there's a conservative, fine, read broadly and deeply, put books in people's hands and make them think about things, and go Socratic and ask them questions, and they'll learn how to think, right? And maybe they don't all reach the same conclusions. That's fine. Mm-hmm. But that's not the project. The project for the sort of Marxist or postmodernist, whatever you want to call it, is you all have to think what I think, and we're going to drive you out if you don't. And so it would be very easy to have conservatives come in and just say, okay, well, here are things as I see them. You're free to think what you want. Read this and answer these questions and write about that and find out what you think, right? And that would be a fine model, and has been for many years. So that would be the short answer to that very difficult question.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think we can, with just a movement, a positive movement. I mean, it's just, yeah, you can't force it. We just need, basically, and I think we are actually. I think there is a large conservative movement that will place itself in positions that can, help support.
Only in institutions where you're allowed to say things. Like, my mother was a teacher in elementary school and middle school, and for years and years, and she'd talk about some problem at the school, and I'd say, why can't you say that? Just say that.
Yeah.
If you're in a teacher meeting, and say that. And she's like, you can't say that. That can't be said. And I said, at the time, I was a teenager, and I went, well, if you can't say what the problem is, you have no chance of fixing it.
Yeah.
And I think this is the problem broadly, is that we're not allowed to say things that are true. I don't want to say we're not allowed. It's discouraged, and there may be consequences for speaking the truth. And that's always been the case whenever there's a communist takeover or a totalitarian takeover. There are things you're just not allowed to say, or it's, you're going to find out. But to steer us a little bit back toward the book, Klavan's talking about, in the early part of the book, sort of the radicalness of the gospel. Like, so the gospels are the four books that talk about the life of Jesus Christ, right? 3 synoptic gospels, and then the Gospel of John. And largely they recount the same events, although some are, obviously, they're occasional and they're aimed at a specific audience. So Matthew is Jewish. He was a tax collector. He's writing to the Jewish people, right? There are other projects for other reasons, for other gospels. And John's comes a little later, we think, and is kind of batting cleanup at the end of the first century, trying to address some of the ways that the churches are going off one way or another, and trying to put them back on a path, right? So the radicalness of the gospel is that there are things you can't say because Rome is going to take over, or there are things has taken over, but like they've put in their little client king in Herod. And if there are rumblings against Rome, Rome's going to come in and destroy everything, which they do actually in, I think, 70 AD, something like that. They come in, they destroy the temple and scatter the Jewish people to the winds for the better part of 2,000 years. So it's another moment where it's this authoritarian thing. There are things you can say and not say. And Jesus comes in and says, you Pharisees, you religious teachers, are laying, you're standing in between God and his people. You're not actually helping them, right? And this is a problem. And he says, I'm the truth. And then they nail him to a tree, which sort of tells you how the world feels about the truth. Now, obviously, this is what the books hold themselves out to be. I'm not telling you have to believe it,
Mm-hmm.
none of that. I'm just suggesting that that's a fairly radical approach to the world, to come in and say, look, the first are going to be last. The blessed are the meek, blessed are the poor in spirit. That's not a pagan way of looking at the world. A pagan way of looking at the world is the Romans are great because they're strong. And if you're strong, you get everything and you take from the weak whatever you want. And that was the way of the world, basically, until Christianity Christianized the world. And suddenly we started to be concerned about, this class of people, you're treating them differently because of their skin or because they're women or because they're this or that. And that's not right. Just because you're strong enough to do that, they're a minority and you're a majority, doesn't mean you should. And why would anybody believe that? Because it's a Christian, more or less, we exist in what was Christendom, and those are the values. But it doesn't come out of a vacuum. It comes out of the Gospels.
And I mean, we did talk about, I mean, I'm actually not very knowledgeable. I've actually never been to a church, like hear a priest talk or anything like that. So I learned a lot of things here, but I can tell actually just from what you said there, actually I don't know much. I didn't know anything about the Gospels actually, and how they were written or who wrote them or why. So I mean, so to just push back on a little, some of these, to call these ideas Christian opposed to Buddhist or something, I mean, or to say that it Christianizes the whole world. Now, at the same time, I do recognize, wow, the Western culture is significant in the world, and there are some values that we are at possible loss of some of these things that we've come so far maybe to establish, and like I said, I admittedly maybe have taken these for granted, but I don't know if it's fair to just wholly attribute them to Christianity, and the whole time I'm reading this too, I do feel like I'm like, that's a very specific time and place in the world,
Right.
and it seems very like these ideas are world changing and do affect the
Definitely.
whole world, and have affected the whole world, and there is, but at the same time, it I have a hard time seeing that like these are not also ideas that can arise from other origins, and I guess so that's the I do have difficulty when I'm reading this sometimes, uh and I guess the biggest difference is when Jesus says, I am truth, or
Right.
Fauci says, I am science, or something. It's like, uh the one thing that has always attracted me to Buddhism, and you've also touched up on this when you were saying, is that his there's a lot of similarities, but one thing that really sticks with me is question everything that I say. Like, don't take
Sure.
anything I say as truth. And that's the major difference. And to me, I appeal more to that, because that I'm truth just kind of sets the stage. I do understand it's nice to have some sort of core to build off of,
Sure.
but to
Can
just
I
openly,
speak to that?
yeah, absolutely.
Um, so I totally understand that feeling. And I, before I was a believer, very much got that, like my antenna was up for that stuff, right? Because you don't want to be a sucker. And, you know, frauds like Fauci tend to say crazy things like that,
Yeah.
right? Um, the thing is, it's not a claim like, like you're Joseph Smith, and might say to the Mormons, well, I can't show you the secret scroll that the angel gave to me, but you just have to trust me, and also you have to let me sleep with your wife. No offense to anyone in our audience who happens to be a Mormon. I'm just saying that's the difference in kind than the sort of things that Christ is doing in the Gospels. Because it's not just, follow me and give me your women and give me your money. It's the opposite, right? It's, let me disclose, if you follow me, I don't even have a place to lay my head. I have no money. There's going to be suffering involved here. He tells them ultimately, like, take up your cross and follow me, not let's go to the gravy train, right? And store up your treasures in heaven. Like, in this world, there's going to be evil and you're going to have to deal with it. But there's something more. And so I am the truth is not a believe everything I say because I'm a cool dude. It's an ontological claim. That is to say, what is the nature of God? The nature of God is that everything that is true was established by God to be true. Everything that is good, we talked about this before, right? That the truth and beauty and goodness and reality hang on, exist from, proceed out of the Godhead. And so he's saying, I'm the Godhead. And by the way, he checks all of these boxes that have been held out for the Old Testament that said there's going to be one who comes who's going to do this and he's going to do that, he's going to do this, he's going to do the other thing, and this is going to be his parentage, and this is where he's going to be born, and he's going to not only is he going to be born to a virgin, and like tick 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 hits all those boxes all the way up to things like the lamb's bones will not be broken, right? And then in the crucifixion, generally, if you wanted somebody to die quicker, you break their legs so they couldn't push themselves up to get a breath. And so they die faster. And by the way, these executioners, if the people they were set to execute didn't die, they'd be killed. Like the Romans did not play. So he was dead before they needed to come and break his legs. So it's like all of these prophecies, all of these things, and then it's like, oh, I'm going to rise on the third day. That's the sign of Jonah, as in Jonah was inside the fish for 3 days and then spat out on the land. And so he resurrected, appears to witnesses. And in Matthew's gospel, it says he dies. There's darkness on the land. All of a sudden it's dark at like noon or whatever it was, 3 o'clock. And the ground shakes in Jerusalem, and the curtain rips in the temple. And this is like a 3-foot thick curtain, right? It doesn't just rip. And all these things happened. And 3 days later, he appears to witnesses, like crowds of people see him again. And this is written in living memory. So if you read the book of Matthew in the first century and you go up to Jerusalem and there's somebody, and there's some of them are named, and you could knock on their door and be like, hey, did this happen? Was there darkness at this hour? Was there an earthquake? Did you see this guy? And people obviously must have said yes. Otherwise, it would have been discarded as a lie, right? And wouldn't have been something that anybody would bother to copy forward because it had been debunked. But lots of people saw this. So I think this is the reason that the text endures, is because this is all written in living memory. Like if somebody wrote a book about Oroville High School in 1997 and made a bunch of claims about stuff that happened, that we were there, like we would have been there to witness, and we go, no, that didn't happen. And you go ask everybody in the school, did that happen? No, it didn't happen. That book's not going to get like picked up for reprinting, right? Somebody's going to debunk it and it's going to be on the ash heap of history, as many such things have been, right? As hoaxes generally are. So there's a reason to believe these things because they exist in history. And my trouble with some of the Buddhist ideas, some of which I think are really beautiful, but the idea that like everything's an illusion, then what is there? If everything's an illusion, then what is reality? What is truth? And if the question is like, well, maybe there is no truth, then we're back to the postmodernist, there's no objective reality. It's just it's the same claim. And so I've had trouble with that, but maybe you have a response.
Yeah, well, okay, that actually kind of leads to that my first question, or that I wanted to cover is the worldview that we need to, because it does. I mean, that's a good question. That is actually what I recognize, because I would have considered a lot of postmodern ideas for that very reason, that Buddhism is something I I've just, yeah, from the beginning we talked about the Siddhartha book
Right.
you read for the debate club or something at some point. Um, I mean, that has always been uh something that appeals to me, and then the reason that it appeals to me is because I've found myself in a similar spot as Descartes, where he's trying to think, okay, how do so
How
let's
do
take
I know?
skepticism, right?
Right.
I mean, let's take this, let's do it, because if we do want truth, and we're looking for truth, and I believe Buddha is looking for truth, and in order to find truth, you do have to get to a very skeptical place, because you don't want to just start building truth off
On
false
nothing.
claims.
Right.
So it is real important to go. So I've done a similar thing, and I didn't come to the same conclusion as Descartes, that I think therefore I am. I come to a very similar conclusion. Maybe it might sound, but it's actually more similar. It's more similar to Buddha, and that's something exists. Not it's not me. I think therefore I exist. It's more like something exists. That I think is a more base claim to have. And then
Something exists.
something exists like that.
Okay.
So my worldview. I guess I'll explain my worldview, and I do think that you can come to some truth, although it might be different. It starts with that something exists, and then so
Right.
the next place I go to is, okay, well, what is it?
What is it?
And it's not matter. It can't. Every time I look at it, it's, oh, because I know what it's not. It's not something that can be cut, like a Zeno type thing, perspective, like a Zeno's paradox, where we can just infinitely cut things. Now, I do go, okay, is it possible that we're in a pixelated universe where at the very base of existence, it's either like on or off, like where you're either in this pixel, and if there's movement, you're actually transported from this pixel to this pixel. I guess maybe there's some possibility there, but it just doesn't seem like that. Doesn't really seem uh to me. It seems like it makes more sense to say that, well, it's probably in not material then. And then I always kind of defer to this consciousness as a placeholder. It just seems like one possibility, but I don't actually. But usually when I think about it, I think like, actually consciousness can change matter, and matter can change consciousness. So there's probably something that's actually it's neither consciousness nor matter, or just to
Or both.
or to follow up on that too, because just, yeah, so people,
Okay.
somebody
Yeah.
listening, is that like, yeah,
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
you can take you could take drugs, and it would literally change your thought process, and
Sure.
at the same time you can, through meditative practice or just thinking in general, can cause actual changes in your brain chemistry.
Sure. Sure.
So neither one of those seem like they can underline the other. So
Yes.
so a lot of these things, okay, so what is it? So some people think, okay, then that's God. And I'm okay with calling that, if okay, that we could go there, but it's, to me, it's not a creator. And we talked about this little thing. It's that is the nature of reality, and everything is an expression of that. So now existence would be this expression of the underlying reality. That whatever
Okay.
whatever it is.
I think that's reasonable. And I think that none of that really contradicts like a Christian cosmology, I don't think.
No, I don't think so either, actually. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, we disagree about the creator bit, but that's sort of so like
Yeah, I
Moses.
don't think we need to focus too much. I mean, I think it could be.
Moses asks the burning bush, right?
I can we you did talk about that. He talked about that burning bush, and I actually don't. I'm not familiar with that. And didn't that some that was some of the problems reading this book. Sometimes
Right.
so he actually did really well on some things. He would explain some things that
Sure.
probably some people are like, hey, why are you explaining this? I really don't know this. I don't know
Right.
about the burning bush. I have heard that in my life, but it actually doesn't
Okay. Well,
hold.
I'll very briefly sketch it out if you're interested.
Yeah, I am.
But in the book of Exodus, Moses he's Hebrew in exile in Egypt, and the Pharaoh says that there are too many of these Hebrews, they're going to overwhelm us. All of you midwives have to throw the babies into the river, the Nile, kill these babies, all of the firstborn sons. And Moses's mother loves him too much, puts him in a basket, and she sends him down the river. And Pharaoh's daughter finds Moses, and she says, "I'll take him in as my child." And then she finds Moses' mother and has her as the nurse in the court of the Pharaoh to bring up this boy. So he's extremely well educated. I mean, at this time, ancient Egypt is, the power in the world,
Mhm.
right? And he learns he's a Hebrew. He sees someone beating a Hebrew slave, and he kills the man that's beating the slave. And then he flees for his life out of Egypt and ends up going back up north toward the Promised Land area. And he's met a woman. He's become part of a community. He's gotten married, and he's out on the mountain with his herds, or his father-in-law's herds, and he hears someone calling his name, Moses, Moses. And he goes, and he sees a bush that's on fire, and there's a voice coming out of the bush, but the bush is not consumed by the fire. And it says, I'm the Lord your God. Take off your sandals. You're standing on holy ground. And it says, you're going to go back down to Egypt, and you're going to get Pharaoh to let my people go. And he's like, well, you get the wrong guy. Not me, right? I'm slow of speech and slow of tongue. He knows he's a murderer, and he's standing in the fate of God, right? And finally, he's all right. Well, I'll go down, but who am I going to tell people that I talk to? Who shall I say you are? And he says, I am that I am, says God. And I think what a Christian theologian or a Jewish rabbi would tell you is that essentially that's the fire that burns but is never consumed. It's like being. God is being.
Mhm.
And God is the being on which rests all other being, right? If that makes sense. So
No, that's actually well, that makes
that's what you're
most sense.
saying,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? So it's an incredibly with very few words. You got to think about the fact that these people, they didn't have terabytes to write on. Like they had scrolls they had to write on, and so the incredible economy. Now it's believed, and there's some controversy now, but I think Moses probably wrote the 5 books of Moses. Exodus is one, so he probably wrote this, or at least he collected it and had it written down. But like um, with incredible economy to tell something that's that profound and that deep about the nature of existence, that it all proceeds from the one being that was never created, that created time and space and matter and is itself a spirit from which all other spirits are kindled. Some of that agrees with the Buddhist cosmology, at least.
Mhm. That
Certainly the Tao.
yeah, that is those like that. I actually that appeals to me. That very spiritual, not too um like defined in how can you define something so undefinable?
Right.
Uh,
Ineffable.
without I mean that to me that's enough. Yeah, that what you said there, that's definitely something that resonates with my understanding
Right.
of so on I to go back because yeah, one of the things is I'm thinking uh and your question about like the problem with this idea that everything's an illusion, I do want to stay on that because that is again, I don't want to believe that everything is not an illusion just because it will uh better society. I
Right.
do care about truth, right.
Truth. Right.
If the fact of the matter is everything is an illusion, I don't want to just tell myself it's not. So so uh I guess to decide for figuring out if that case is the case. So like going back to the worldview,
Okay.
that concept of God, that there's a being under the being, that all being exists, is kind of where I've
Right.
been able to just I feel like that's like an axiom of truth
Mhm.
to
Right.
build off of. It's not much to like create,
Right.
to
But
find a
you,
whole lot of truth everywhere, but
yeah.
that I think is is has grounding. Um, and then so and I guess and at the same time I want to talk about this book and some of the things that I did have some
Yeah.
difficulty with it on that. So we kind of are in this skeptical era of these skeptical philosophers asking questions, but I feel he he brought John Locke up in a weird way, because to me John Locke is a devout Christian, and his whole he was always trying
Mm.
to prove God. Like that again, I'm I was an undergrad in philosophy and a concentration in logic and science. So I read these philosophers from the perspective.
Sure.
I don't have maybe everything that he was saying. Maybe I'm missing some aspects, but from what I saw, his arguments were always lined up to prove God. So and he's
Well,
also
that's not all he was doing, but he certainly came from a place where that was understood, right? That he's writing as a Christian to a Christian world that believes that, God exists and Jesus is his son and all that, right?
yeah,
So definitely, even if he's writing about other things like, property rights or whatever,
yeah,
but some of that does go back to the moral law and therefore the moral lawgiver.
yeah. And the and what I think Klavan had a problem with, and actually conservatives in general have a problem with, um, that I'm going to push back a little bit on, is that science is empiricism, or like those are synonymous. He didn't come out and say that, but he would say things as if, I mean, and that's why I want to get into like the flow of philosophy real short. Let me just give it for anybody listening. This is by no means, this is just how I see it. There was like Locke empiricism. I'm not going to believe it unless I see it. We need, and then Hume came along and discounted that we can't just because something has happened in the past doesn't mean we can say that it's going to happen again in that way. We could give like the black. We used to think all swans are white.
Right, the
Any
black
swan I've
swan.
seen is white. Watch, the next swan we see will be white. There it is. It's white. Therefore, but that's not proof, because all it took was some Australian or somebody that visited
Right.
Australia, see black swan. Hey, guess what?
Yeah,
There's
that was a book. um
Talib,
yeah,
the black
Nassim
Talib.
Talib.
Yeah,
Yeah, he
yeah.
Yeah, he wrote a book called the Black Swan, and he said that a black swan is an event for which it has it's unexpected, it has an extreme impact, and people construct uh, a belief that they could have or should have expected it, even though there's no reason they should ever
Yeah,
have expected
yeah,
it. Right?
yeah.
That's the definition of a black swan. But you don't even have to go that far.
No,
The turkey thinks the farmer is his
yeah,
friend
yeah,
until Thanksgiving
yeah.
Day,
Thousand
right?
days of feeding, and
And
he has
so,
every reason to believe that turkey's
right,
gonna.
I mean, there are problems with empiricism, obviously, um, because not everything's testable, not everything is repeatable, and sometimes things come barreling out of reality. I mean, there's no so we talk about science, right? But the there's very little that science can explain in terms of things like why is it that unsentient neurons can create a conscious
Mhm. Absolutely, yeah.
neural network that I'm right now talking and thinking about my own brain.
Oh yeah, yeah,
What is thinking about what up here?
yeah, yeah,
Science cannot answer that because
yeah.
it's bizarre. It's a complex system that it can't be mapped. We don't know where life originates from. We don't know where the universe exists from because you can't call something out of nothing.
Mhm.
And everything has a beginning because of causality. That is to say, every effect has a cause. So, what was the first cause? Um, in fact, I'm reading a really interesting book. I know we're not talking about this book right now,
Oh, yeah,
but
yeah.
there's a book called The Devil's Delusion by David Berlinski. And it's the subtitle. It's first of all, he's hilarious. Um, you can Google him or look him up on YouTube. He's hilarious, but he's also extremely learned. And the subtitle is Atheism and Its Scientific Pretensions. And he talks specifically about
Mhm.
this idea that like science pretends to know an awful lot more about this universe and where it began and where life comes
Yeah,
from
yeah,
and where consciousness comes from than it actually does.
yeah. No, well, that's what I want to push back on a little bit is because so going from now Hume, I would consider Hume perhaps an atheist, but then and he was the one that was saying that empiricism is not the way to find truth, basically.
Mm.
Out of those philosophers in that era, Kant was probably the closest to where I was. I mean, he's kind of does stand back. He recognizes like, well,
Well,
okay,
he's Christian, is Kant.
I think he is. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
he tends he doesn't come out. I mean, he tends to believe it. I mean, he has like, and that's kind of where I am. Is like, okay, there is this like when I see what can happen from this radicalism that doesn't embrace again, that's where I'm at right now. I'm kind of I kind of do buy the argument that
Mm.
you've presented as like for the sake of humanity, we should maybe just kind of agree with this. And then but is that but I still inside
Mm.
myself, I'm not able to accept that just for that purpose, even though I
Right.
do understand it. So that's where I'm at right now. This is like,
Because you're not a utilitarian, right? A
yeah,
utilitarian argument is let's believe this for the good of everybody. Or let's at least act as if this is true and it'll have better social consequences down the road.
yeah,
Well, the trouble is again, if we're not doing true things, right, then reality at some point is going to come and jack you up because
and it,
that's what reality does
yeah,
when you're dreaming, when you've got ideas that don't comport with reality. At some point, the map and the territory don't match, and you walk off a cliff that you think is solid ground, right? So I'm not making a utilitarian argument that you should believe this because it's better for everybody, even if that might be the case. And I'm not even sure better for everybody is the way I'd put it. I think it's something more like the center of our civilization should be what is true and beautiful and good, and concerned with the highest truth. And it's all right if there are people on the fringes who are doing other things and thinking other thoughts, but they can't be at the center of things. Like you, to borrow from Jonathan Pageau, if you think about a cathedral, what's in the center of the thing, right? The Eucharist and the altar, like that's the center of the thing. And you can have gargoyles out on the edges, but you can't put the gargoyle in the center because then you got problems, right? So everybody doesn't need to think the same thing. It's better that everybody doesn't think exactly the same thing, certainly, because that's a cult. But like, we need to be mindful about what we're putting in the center of our civilization, and then what gargoyles we allow at the fringes to do, to dance to their own tunes.
Mhm. So, so, so to continue, so after, just to go back on the science portion of it, like I feel that, so I again, I feel that science is the pursuit of truth.
It should
And
be.
yeah, well, yeah, exactly. And it's not being used that way, but it's not fair uh for to say science is a religion, basically. That's actually what I want to get to, because
Well, it surely can be. I mean,
oh,
anything can
absolutely
be,
can be, absolutely can be, but
but it
it's not.
shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be, and it's not like science. And so let me explain that part is from. So that's kind of for me, and there's a lot of great thinkers, of course, but I kind of, for me, science developed from Locke's empiricism, Hume saying no, that's not the case just because we experience it, Kant trying to things, and then the main ones were Kuhn and Popper and Kuhn. Popper, I think, was Karl Popper was the falsification. He's like, we can't prove anything by he again recognizing this empiricism problem, or a problem of induction, but we can propose theories and then we can try to falsify them. And if we can't falsify them, then they just hold up, and we
Right.
kind of
That's
build
good
on
enough to be going on with.
and so I guess that's what when I talk about like a worldview, and I think as individuals we all have to do this. And what science is kind of the collective worldview, and everyone is all looking at it, and we're all trying to like throw stuff at it and make, now there is a negative aspect to that, because that's the only thing you can do is disprove theories. But in that accumulation of disproving theories, we're able to develop something that is pretty solid, to foundation. And then of course Kuhn, on top of that, came up. He was more on like the paradigm shift, that when we do come up with most of science, you read academic journals, they're very small. We were
Right.
wrong about that, but it doesn't really change the understanding of the
Right. The
universe.
paradigm.
Yeah,
Sure.
the paradigm shift, exactly. So Kuhn is this paradigm shift. Now, as I'm saying this, I'm looking at the same time. I do realize how I realize the problem with just like we're tearing down statues, tearing down things that we get to this point where we're trying to say nothing. But so I'm actually saying science is parallel with some of these conservative thoughts that I feel those are getting attacked. I feel science is getting attacked and saying like males
Well, let's
are not males,
right.
and I'm like, actually science is a great thing. Let's not tear
No,
down
it's a wonderful tool. All right. But let
science.
me let me just, can we define a couple of terms here? And if you don't like my definition, then we'll tweak it. Okay. But I would say logic, inductive or deductive, logic is a way of testing reality, right? It's a discipline of philosophy and a discipline of mathematics. Okay. It's a way of testing reality. Science is another way of testing reality by a process in which observation and prediction and test allow you to refine your understanding of the natural world.
Mm-hmm. Through
Um,
falsification, though. I mean that
well,
a caveat. That's an important aspect, that all that's true,
well,
but
it's
that
not
is
only falsification, but falsification is part of the process. You're
yeah.
going to want to try if you can prove yourself wrong, you should do that before your colleague does
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
academic journal. So that's certainly true. But the thing is, there's also a thing called scientism,
Mm-hmm.
which I would say is not science,
Not
but it
exciting.
is the religification of science
Sure.
that
Sure.
says, we worship at the altar of Dr. Fauci for his degrees, and
Mm-hmm.
we worship his holy
Yeah.
hand grenade, that kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
thing,
Absolutely. No, no, no.
right?
Yeah. I'm so
So,
far everything is
so that's
on
bad.
point. On point. I'm
I
agreed.
think that's bad juju,
Yeah.
right? But the other thing is, um, we have to decide who gets to say what's good.
Mm-hmm.
What's good to do, what you at the very least need to do, and what you can't do, right? So who's going to be master? Who's going to make those decisions?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it does. We're cutting out a little bit, a little choppy there, but wait, hold on. Let me make sure. I wait, say
Is it
something.
still choppy?
Um, a little bit. The video is, but I think the audio is okay. Um,
Okay.
so I think we jump. I mean, yeah. So everything I follow and agree with all your definitions, and then we're taking a big jump though with uh, I mean, once we hear the shoulds and the like.
Right.
I mean, that is where we are, and I do agree. These are definitely questions we should ask, but I don't know if we're at the point where we can draw.
Okay.
Okay, so okay.
Yeah. No, I'm only saying that, like, the scientism argument is trust the experts.
Yeah, yeah,
The
no,
experts will tell you
yeah,
what's
yeah,
okay to do.
no, and that as like as I mean, and it's funny because I mean my degree that I wrote a dissertation on is psychology, and it's about it's very not. I mean, a hard scientist is going to call my I actually don't like calling as a psychologist as a science. There
Right.
are hard sciences within psychology, and they're not
Yes.
what I'm about. And that's where they're uh you know
Mhm.
chemicals, brain chemistry and stuff. And to me, that's not as interesting as I take a very holistic approach and a very most scientists would look at my dissertation and it's an explorative interviews about death and things. Actually, that's something I want
Sure.
to get to eventually because we didn't last time, and that is actually my one of the most. Yeah, I don't even want to talk about that yet. Let's get but most for me when my undergrad as a philosophy of science, like looking like I do love
Right.
science, and I think we build a good system to try to understand reality and yeah, this is extremely problematic to me. Is this religiousness of or you call it scientism? That's a term.
Right.
That's a real term. I mean, yeah, that is something that I'm so vehemently against. And I guess so. Part of me again in our first conversation, I was saying it's like even that we differ on some views. At the
Mm.
very least, I want to, and I'm representing a group of me disenfranchised classical liberal agnostic
Sure.
atheists. Hey, actually, I think there's a lot more in common that I've ever recognized
Right.
with these conservative thoughts that I think I want to develop this at least a coalition that not hey later on in the future we can um uh that I would like to yeah build a friendship in a way like
Sure.
by me I mean our, you and I represent something but as a grander scheme that so
Right.
something that I've never done in my lifetime uh really given the respect that I think Christianity maybe deserves that I hadn't given and I want to give that make this bridge, make this coalition and realize, hey, we are combating the same thing. But I don't want to abandon science, and I hope that the core of
Right.
science actually develop the philosophy. Yeah, I'd say the philosophy of science. The philosophy of science is also part of Western culture and even part of
Absolutely.
Christianity. And like I said, most of the uh, philosophers of science that I studied, one of the problems I had actually as an undergrad was they're always trying to prove God. Like what and they're always, I feel like they're actually just trying to convert me into Christianity the whole time. That's what I
Right.
felt they were
Right.
doing. I don't feel that way now, and I wish I would have recognized it sooner
Right.
because I was beckoning in this radical atheism. And again, I'm okay with calling myself atheist or not. I consider myself not a religious and in the term maybe, but not. Sometimes the term atheist is like I disbelieve it. I just look at it as I have a view that, like I said, I've got this worldview, and there's definitely something that's not materialistic that easily could fall into the realm of God. That there's some sort of underlying being that all beings exist on. That I agree with.
Mm.
The specifics of it, I don't. So again, I don't want to call myself atheist or not atheist. Um, but at the same time, I'm not. I do want to, yeah, I want to show how much there is actually in common in some of my views that. So I want to go back to this worldview. I want to add one more thing to the that we have touched up on. So that there is this being that everything exists on. The way I look at it is not a. I look at it as our existence is the expression of that. And I do want to go back because I think the very most important point that we're touching upon is a problem with Buddhism is like you said, yeah, whoa, wait, Buddhism could lead to this what we're facing right now in
Right.
reality. So I guess part of me, and I don't want to just I don't want to defend Buddhism for the
No.
sake of defending it, but I feel like to me Buddhism is the way to truth, and there if there are problems I want to address them, and I
Sure.
don't think that they lead, and I guess for the reason innately why I feel like Buddhism doesn't lead to this radicalist thing that's going on right now is because it didn't lead me that way. So so so
Mm.
so 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 there is a problem there, and I want to identify it. Where does that come up? Because Buddhism, there's we have empathy and connectiveness. These concepts I feel are
Sure.
abandoned and even though we could say things are illusion, but it's not like, hey, everything's an illusion, man, and nothing matters. It's that to me it's not everything is an illusion, but material is the material universe is an illusion, and I agree with
Right.
that, and I think a lot of Christianity would also
But how does that work for you with the idea of empirical science? If in one sense you're saying um, the material world is an illusion, and on the other side you're saying the material world is built on something testable and repeatable with empirical, at least the possibility of something empirical, mathematical, testable, repeatable on some level. Those would seem to be contradictory.
good, no, no,
Um,
that's excellent. Let me, yeah, let me. I'll have to go. I'll reiterate some points, and then there's one point that does, and it is a difficult concept. But this is the only conclusion I've come to is that, and I don't think we touched on it, but it's theory of relativity. I think has a point, and that doesn't mean that's not like the again these things are perverse. Like when you hear theory of relativity, you all automatically think like everything's relative, but
no, no, no. Yeah, no, it has a particular
oh,
meaning.
wait, no, I mean that's how it's taken. But
Right.
to me, the aspect of theory of relativity is the space-time concept, and basically that time like has to be. It's not like this is what I believe, and then it's every time I think about it, time does have to be a dimension, and the way we experience it can't actually be where there's a beginning and there's an end. So again, everything is an expression of something, and our reality. So like we do exist in this temporal reality with matter and time, but they are an expression of the same underlying truth. And so
Yes.
so I'm
Yes. Hmm.
I'm not an empiricist, right? And I don't believe I believe what science can do is describe it's mostly describing this the human experience, and it's not except for if you take again it's more of a worldview. Science is part of that, and the other one is evolution that I want to get into. And again, I mean, Charles Darwin, of course, he's Christian as well, and he didn't understand genetics to the extent like Mendel at the same time was kind of looking at it from that perspective.
Right.
But the theory of evolution, because it is a theory, and there have been a lot of changes, and actually this goes back to the very I've commented on a lot of your posts here and there, but I think that was the post that
Right.
that kind of sparked this conversation, because this is actually very core in my worldview. Is that one of the things I've always disagreed with, and I did with Domeyer in biology in high school when I had him, because there had always been a theory of evolution. I mean, the Greeks talked about evolution. Lamarck was the big one that he was like the laughing stock, because he said that uh, the giraffe would stretch its neck to eat the leaves on the trees, and then every generation they would get longer and longer. And I actually agree with that. They disproved it. The way they supposedly disproved it was by chopping the tail off rats, and then they showed after many generations that the tails didn't get any shorter. And I'm thinking that's a shitty experiment, because what that would do, if what Lamarck was saying was true, would be it would the tail would get either get like a gecko where it can easily detach because it doesn't want its
Mhm.
tail continuously cut off, or it would get thicker so it could prevent getting cut. Like so it actually was a terrible. So I actually agree. I have actually don't believe Lamarck's theory of evolution was ever properly disproven. And then when Charles Darwin came around and kind of had a better mechanism from a scientific perspective of this randomness, I've always thought randomness is just a placeholder until we figure out exactly what is the
Right.
mechanism behind it. And,
So,
and for me, I
yeah.
actually believe in Lamarck's thing. I believe that, and we could test this to a degree. If I were to take like sperm samples from when I was 14 and now, I bet there would be you could there'd be a difference, and it might be difficult to say how those differences change just because I think something. But again, that's a whole area that I actually think is I actually was close to going into that field of biology. It seemed tedious, and I'm actually I just it wasn't my life's work to prove or to try to
Sure.
find out. And I might it didn't seem that fun. I just believe that it's not random. So
No,
I
I
do
don't
want to
think
get
it's
back.
random either.
So my worldview is has evolution is very strong. Like it's the one theory to me for under again. This is like the human experience. To understand the human experience, evolution is very core, and not because not from a scientist perspective where evolution is true. It has to be true, and I'm going to make sure that it's true. It's the one theory that just seems to hold up, but it does get changed. And
Yeah,
like I said,
and it has problems, of course.
and it
I
does have
mean,
problems. And that's actually why it's strong, is because it's still a working theory, and we're still, and I think that's one of the biggest
right.
paradigm shifts that we'll see in the future is recognizing that it's not random, but actually identifying what it is, and it's probably something immaterial. It's probably something like consciousness or something like that. The conscious experience through one's life actually changes their genetic material.
I think we know that for sure. I think that's been proven, is
Okay,
that certain experiences in your life actually unlock certain genes.
Yeah.
So you do something new, and it's like you've walked into a room and flipped on a light switch, and your body, like those,
Epigenetics. Yeah, there is
right? Yeah,
something. Yeah, yeah. No, and it's funny because I had these thoughts. Yeah, back in Domeyer's class, I remember. I don't know if you had Domeyer. Did you have Domeyer or McGee?
no,
I
no,
biology teacher, Domeyer and McGee. But anyway, yeah, yeah. Shout out to them, great guys. They had me thinking about these ideas.
right,
And I remember him telling me, like I was trying to argue with, hey, well, I think Lamarck actually has a good point and stuff. He's like, okay, well, go do your PhD. He was actually the one that said, okay, well, you
right.
okay, and so sometimes I think when back to this idea that when people say science, 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 they're not scientists. If you
Right.
just accept these claims, to me, the spirit of science is Buddhism, is questioning everything.
That's interesting.
You know,
So I here's I just want to respond
yeah, yeah,
because I think you've said some interesting stuff. Um, there's science that you could do in your backyard, right? And then there's stuff that requires increasingly sophisticated, teams or equipment or hours, however you might allocate all that, right? And that comes down to, in many cases, like money,
mhm.
right? And grants and who's going to ask what question. And sometimes something shows up and it's sort of scientifically fashionable and it sounds good and all the experts do this and it's science. Lobotomies are really a good thing to do.
Yeah, yeah. I think you got the
You know,
Nobel Prize for that too, right? Yeah,
yeah, like, electroshock therapy. Oh, you think you might be gay? Let's put some electrodes on you and let's dunk you in some cold water and then you'll be cured. Like, um, I'm not only picking on psychology, those are just the ones
no,
that
no,
come
no,
to me
no.
at the moment. But like there's a lot of that,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
And to some extent, there are personalities and egos and who's going to fund what. And then there's taboo stuff.
mhm.
Like nobody's really interested in testing populations by race for IQ to
Yeah,
see if there are differentials because that opens up a whole box that nobody really wants to look at unless they've got an axe to grind, right?
mhm.
But then there are other things like there's a lady, she's been on Joe Rogan's podcast a few times, Deborah So, and she's specifically a scientist around sex, human sexuality. Not like, Dr. Ruth, but like actual biological stuff, right? And she left the academy because there were so many questions she wasn't allowed to ask, particularly when a lot of this trans stuff came up. And she started going, okay, well, let's try and falsify this. And they went, no, 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 don't do
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
And it's like there's a there's a controlling hand on the way science gets done now. And Eric and his brother Brett Weinstein, they've both talked about this, and Dr. Heather Hying. And in
yeah.
fact, I think the next book I'm going to send you is one of theirs.
Oh,
Um,
Hunter's Guide to the.
yeah, Hunter Gatherer's Guide to the
Okay. Oh, we
21st
can.
Century.
Yeah, yeah, we can. Yeah, we can talk about
But
it. Yeah,
there's
yeah,
more. But in
yeah.
any event,
No, I like
um,
Brett Weinstein and Heather
yeah,
Hyde.
they're
That's
great.
the main Dark Horse is probably my
Dark
main
Horse podcast, they're
predilection.
excellent.
Yeah, yeah,
So, but my point being, right, that um, there are perverse incentives and there are sort of corrupt ways the money is moved, and there are questions you're not allowed to ask, or you'll be drummed out of respectable science. And this even happened to people who were like Dr. Robert Malone,
yeah,
like who was against a lot of this, the disinformation that was being circulated around the vaccines, the mRNA vaccines. And they did their best in the media and in the academic world to try and discredit this guy who was a heavy hitter.
oh yeah,
And it's like all other human enterprises, there's corruption here that muddles the way to the truth. The process is pure if you can stay with it purely. But of course, institutions can rot. And I think the institution is pretty rotten at the moment. And so it's like, I
yeah,
want that to be an avenue for truth,
yeah.
but I don't even trust the peer review process, given
Oh,
the fact that, like,
absolutely. Yeah. No, that.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree with that 100. I mean, that is at the core of what we're dealing with. What the book said here, and what I do agree with this is that
Right.
we're under attack, and whether we call it Christianity, Western culture, or science, I mean, these are all under attack. I mean, the
Yes.
scientific process is perversified, or if that's a word or makes sense. I mean, it is not. Yeah, it's not. Uh,
Well, the process is pure. The institutions are rotten.
yeah, and I guess so. I mean, part of and part of the thing we're kind of bouncing on is that I'm having a difficult uh pointing out. Like I said, I don't want to just believe that. Yeah, I guess I want to identify how did it, I mean, is there a problem with the scientific process, or did they just they where was the loophole that they got in?
I think it's money. I think it comes down to money.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
I think it comes down to money, and where it's not money, it's power.
yeah. That's
And I don't mean that in the way Foucault means it. I mean like
yeah.
the Manhattan Project was largely a feat of engineering. It was a part of theoretical physics to some extent, but it was largely a feat of engineering.
Mhm.
And it created the most powerful bomb that had ever existed. And it led on to the creation of even more powerful bombs that make it look like a firecracker in comparison, right? And that got all that work got done, and it almost immediately got leaked to the Soviet Union, and they started building bombs, right?
Yeah,
And those bombs have been pointed we at different places in the world um, since our grandparents were young.
yeah.
And um, for example, during the Korean War, my grandfather was on the battle group that was testing the H bomb in the Bikini Atoll, right? Um, so we've been living under the shadow of this thing, and it's sort of the ultimate power to totally destroy ourselves if we wanted to.
Mhm.
Uh, and there are a select few people with, submarines or in silos
Mhm.
who could push some buttons, and we could stop worrying about this whole thing right now,
Yeah.
right? So it's never been as existentially urgent that we get a handle on reality,
Hmm.
because a few people hypnotized by their own delusions or hatreds or whatever could do incalculable damage to the human race. And so my reason for moving more in the direction that Klavan is moving, right? In the direction of let's all sit down and read the Bible for a minute. Let's all sit down and read Coleridge and Keats and Shelley. And let's just slow this thing way down and start thinking about what's good and what's true real hard. And we might not all come to the same conclusions, but let's think about that and talk about that um, collectively, right? As many people as have ears to hear, let them hear.
Hmm.
Um, why is life important? Why is human life of any value? What makes it so? It's not science. Science is a wonderful tool, but it can't tell us why um, your life has meaning, right? And it so happens Christianity can do that. I think Buddhism has some good things to say about that. But this is another thing I wanted to ask you about. And I know you have a slew of things you want to get to, but I wanted to get your thoughts on this. Do you believe that, like Bob Dylan said, you got to serve somebody? It might be the devil, it might be the Lord, it might be, whoever you are, you have to serve somebody. What do you make of the religious impulse in human beings? What do you think that is
Nothing.
for?
Um, yeah, okay. That's I mean, I guess so the impulse to
to worship. Like,
Okay.
and let me like lay this out, okay? It might be if you're a workaholic, maybe you worship your job,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? Or you worship porn, or you worship, yourself. So you're always getting,
Hmm.
plastic surgery so you look as beautiful as you possibly can in your own eyes. Or like you can, it doesn't just need to be a building where you go and put your forehead on the ground, right? But there's something, the highest thing is what I would call the instinct to worship, whatever the highest thing in your life is. And if it's God, that means something very specific about what's sacred and what's profane. But if it's money, then the sacred and profane are very different,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So what where do you think the instinct to worship comes from, and what is it for in
Yeah,
the human person?
yeah, no. So, and most another thing for for me that another attraction towards that Buddhist thought is it is very those and evolution and Buddhism are to me they're like completely compatible with the 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 psyche. I look at Buddhism as more of a psychology. My psychology is largely based on uh now what Buddha did. He never really addressed evolution, but you can when I go both down both those routes to answer that question, it would be very similar, and it is, and I have to kind of go all over the place a little bit, but luckily we've already kind of touched up on some of these. So, and again, ultimately, again, this is only the human experience, and that's kind of what you're asking about. It isn't completely the nature of everything, and I tie the theory of relativity in is just because evolution being the change through time, yet actually time is just somewhere we're moving along. We feel that we're moving linear, but it's actually we're and I we haven't even talked about free will, but I do believe in free will, but you're free to travel within the expression of the all. And so basically evolution to me is like that's our reality is this change through time, even though ultimately change through time is actually just one thing. So, but I do want to answer your question, but I am saying that I will say this. It might come off sounding as like, oh, that's just real like scientist, but istic or something. But evolution explains these things. I look at it, does it have an evolutionary advantage? And 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 Buddha addresses these things, same things, all the by just introspection on like what is it that I feel and everything. And one of the biggest ones for me, I mean, all of these pleasures. So wait, so I guess I would put it in the category of it has some sort of a drive. And like you said, with work, that we do have to worship something. We need things to motivate us, basically, because
Right.
without motivation, how would we propagate? So or propagate or um uh so so I believe that is, and now sometimes some of our impulses are uh they don't necessarily need to have a purpose in of itself, but they do have again, I to me most evolution will explain most of it. So again, all over the place. But to answer that question, that impulse is a drive. It's a drive to drive us forward to find meaning. I think is to have meaning is valuable. Now that doesn't mean that there's not meaning. I do believe there is actual meaning, but I also believe that the desire to find meaning in itself is driving us forward. So we
Okay.
could
So
easily get off
let,
track.
let me,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
as you say, you're going all over, and I want to condense this a little
for
bit.
sure. Help me, but yeah, okay, good.
Sure. Um, you can tell me if what I'm saying is right or if it's wrong, but this is what I think I'm hearing you say. Um, in the sense that evolution is some things that are not useful dying off, and some things that are um, helpful for the fitness of a creature in an environment. to the extent that you develop that over the period of time. And so things that are not useful in the environment die away, things that are more useful in the environment grow.
Yeah, that's, I mean, that's evolution, like for individual
But
species.
even for a
That is a very
species,
scientific.
yeah.
I actually believe in evolution as the nature of reality to some extent, or it is expressing
I mean,
itself.
in human life, in an individual human life.
I, not necessarily individual. No, no, more
Okay.
as a whole. Like in a sense, that is actually a core of what is the nature of reality. Even
It's
though,
clearly a process of life, right?
yeah,
Because way over 99% of
yeah,
everything that's ever lived is dead. I mean, species wise, not just individuals, but species, right?
yeah.
So evolution kills off a lot more than it ever preserves. And sometimes, as you say, things happen so fast, somebody comes along and chops off your tail, or there's a volcano and, it's winter for 600 years, right? Evolution's
Yeah,
not going to help you,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So fair enough. And I don't even think it describes the origin of life very well.
No, no, it doesn't.
But in terms of the way that we can adapt to the environment, I think it describes things very well.
Yeah.
But the things like um, you you seem to be saying, and you can again correct me if I'm wrong, that there's the the urge to worship, the religious impulse, is meant to be a psychic organ that helps to orient an individual creature toward meaning, and maybe a community or a culture to find meaning in hierarchy, the highest good and the worst thing you could do, right?
Yeah.
um is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if it's as, I mean, me personally, I don't have a strong disposition to worship in the sense of there is something to find meaning. I mean, I don't know that it, but yes, I mean, generally, yeah, I think that
but
covers
but
up. But
but
I
you
don't
make
think everybody.
sacrifices, right?
What's that?
When you do what you think is good,
Willing to do.
even if you don't want to do it, but you think it's the good thing to do, you're making sacrifices,
Sure.
right? So there's something in that. Like you have
Yeah.
a hierarchy of,
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
you might think about, what would I never do? I would never
Break
really
it.
hurt my kid, right? Like I would not do that. I would not physically knock my kid around like that.
Mhm.
That's profane,
Mhm.
right? Or, even to some extent, like you're at dinner with people you respect. There are some things that would be profane for you to do. You're not going to do those
Yeah,
things,
yeah.
right? And why? Because there's something sacred about them. There's something in them that you're honoring, that you think is better than some of these other things, or maybe the best thing of all, right? These are people that I respect so much for what they went through, or what they represent, or what they know, or what they've been to me, right? You're all the time assigning hierarchies, levels, and the highest level, I suggest, is what you ultimately worship. And it doesn't mean you light a
Okay.
candle or
Okay.
incense
Okay.
or whatever, but
Okay.
it's like whatever you consider highest is what you're worshiping. And it sets the parameters of what is sacred, that is not to be questioned. That's what sacred is. And what's profane, what's not to be done.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Uh, I think so. I mean, so sacred. I mean, sacred is not to be questioned, but the worshiping does. I mean, the sacredness is that is problematic when there is something that's not to be questioned.
But we all have that. I mean, like, you
But
know,
maybe you're saying like, yeah, don't
I mean, everybody has something
maybe
where
or
it's
something.
like,
Yeah,
I don't need to
yeah,
entertain,
yeah,
like,
yeah. Yeah.
There's not a point where if you say to me,
Right.
but was the Holocaust really that bad? I'm going to be like, yeah, let's question that. Like, no,
Yeah. Yeah.
no, right?
Okay.
Everybody
Perfect.
has some things that aren't even worth discussing. It's just not on the table,
Okay.
right? And I'm not saying that like, let's
Yeah.
turn off our brains about everything, but I'm saying there's some things that we're just not going to ever, like, I'm not having that conversation with you because that's silly.
Okay. I just see that that kind of could lead to the same things with like in that, in academia where certain
Well, right,
questions
it needs to
aren't
be
people
in a
aren't
box,
willing to answer or ask
right?
questions. I
Yeah,
mean,
it should be in its own box, and it shouldn't get too big, that box,
mhm,
right? But there are things in that box, right? Like we don't need to have a conversation about whether or not we're going to go out and kick a puppy. Like, no, we're not.
mhm.
That doesn't bear conversation, right? Because it's nonsense. But when it's like, well, um, should we be able to define woman? No, we're not even going to talk about it. That's ridiculous, right? No, if you're going to make some changes, ontological changes, you're going to have to show me some receipts,
Mhm.
right? To the language or to the biology or to the literature, to whatever it is. No, no, explain.
Mhm.
But there are things that you would just say, no, we're not, that's
Well,
silly.
okay.
It's not worth it.
The only, yeah. So the only thing is, I would say I agree with the hierarchy that you're referring to.
Right.
I do have inherently, and this might seem not, but this could be, yeah, this could be an issue. Is I don't know if I could give something absolute sacredness that I mean I can say okay, yeah, whether let's not we're making some real progress in the discussion. We're not going to talk about kicking a puppy, but I'd have a hard time saying that that's not something that ends so and this kind of gets into the, and it is problematic. Again, this I'm recognizing this is not like my strong stance because I'm recognizing that this stance is feels like this is how they're getting through the problem that we're dealing with. They are coming through this, but I'm not. I do have a problem drawing lines saying that sacred and we can't talk about it, and this gets into that like relativity area or case by case scenario. I there are some, I guess I don't like looking at relativity, but it's like context
So
or
let me,
situational. Like I could imagine
right.
that even kicking a puppy, even raping a baby, it's like those things have to be. We can't say it's so sacred we can't talk about it. I mean, like or
No,
like
not to be
pedophilia
questioned.
and stuff like sometimes from a conservative perspective too. Some I feel like wouldn't even be willing. Like I'm 100% like this. I don't this is this like minor attraction person stuff, like normalizing pedophilia and stuff.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
very
evil.
against it,
Right.
but at the same time, I'm like, whoa, let's talk about it. I mean, let's talk about every aspect of it. If
No,
there
but I'm
are
not saying
people,
we
go.
mustn't talk about it. I'm saying it's not to be questioned in the sense that when you turn a corner, let's say, and it's like a KKK rally, or there's Nazi flags everywhere, or there's, people in Hamas who are celebrating the death of Jews, and they go, hey, join our club. You're not going to go to yourself, let's have a deep introspective conversation about the merits of this. You're not even going to question it. You're going to go, no, thanks, not buying, right? I don't need to talk with you about that. I don't have any questions for myself about that. We're not going there, right? Everybody has that, and I'm not saying like I sense that you are rightly concerned about anything that can't be questioned, but what I'm saying is this is a description of something everyone has, whether we like it or not. There are some things where it's just like, that's not a door that I'm going to open for anybody because I've already had a conversation with myself about that, and that's off the table. And we all have that, and you're right, it can be weaponized, um, or it can be gamed where people pretend that something that's really up for debate isn't up for debate at all, and they talk past the sale. But that's a dishonest tactic. That's not the same thing as saying, no, I have things that I'm not interested in uh, questioning. I'm pretty firm footing on this one.
Yeah. No, I again, yeah, I do. I feel that I have like, yeah, we're in a position like, well, yeah, why are I guess so I agree with what you're saying, like, yeah, whoa, like they've got me backed up and having to, like, for instance, yeah. Okay, yeah, I'll give you an example because for the most part, I'm even walking around the alley there, walking around seeing the KKs. Like, I would want to talk to them, or like if a pedophilia, like a pedophilia, I actually would like to sit down and have a conversation with that person and understand them. Again, this is more of a
Yeah,
like cycle. I am willing to have a debate with the most discussed person
sure.
that everything they do, I can. It's not like I'm not.
Right. But
I'm
that's
I'm
not
not
what I
like,
mean. I
yeah,
agree with you. I
yeah. So
understand what you're saying.
okay.
I'm not saying we don't talk to people like that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying we don't talk to people we disagree with. I'm saying you're not going to question whether or not after you have a conversation with a pedophile, maybe I should become a there's
Oh,
that's
yeah,
not even going to be a
yeah,
question for you,
yeah, yeah.
right? That's not going to come up. You're not going to go, well, maybe I should, maybe Hitler had some. No. Even if you talk with somebody who's running that program in their head, there's really no danger of you starting to run that program because it's profane.
Mhm.
And maybe it's profane because you've worked out in your head why it's profane. That's
Yeah.
fine, right? It's not that it has to be like this received wisdom per se, but it's like, here are the things that you're going to get thrown in prison for doing in this culture because it's profane. I'm not going to question whether or not, it, your mafia murders were like legit. No, right? We're not rewriting law books for you.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by sacred and profane. I'm not talking about unpersoning people and saying you can never be spoken with because you know I've gone in and taught English in prisons in um, maximum security prisons on yards with the people who've done the most egregious things.
Mhm.
Um, so that's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is something like you have for yourself a hierarchy of parameters. These are the things that are acceptable to do in ascending order of goodness. And then there's a basement where it's like that's profane, and I'm not even going to question whether or not that's wrong. I know it's wrong, or I know it's not good, or it's the undesirable thing, right? And we all have that, and that's what I'm sort of assigning some idea of worship to. So obviously, it's very high up, the ability to talk about ideas and question things. That's very high up in your level of sacredness, right? And your level of what's good. And maybe being unwilling to talk with somebody for their ideas is sort of a profane notion, right? That hangs together pretty well.
Mhm.
Um, and so, what I think I hear you saying is that those are developed, those parameters, those hierarchies, that impulse to worship is an evolutionary adaptation, a sort of a psychic organ, as I said, for um, advantaging the individual in some sense to drive toward what they think is good.
Uh, Probably, but it wouldn't necessarily be I mean, it could be a byproduct of something in that process.
Sure.
And one part of I don't believe, and you mentioned it too, that evolution is problematic for, like, how does life, the origin of it doesn't really address the origin of, it's like once it's going, it's better to apply it presently, like let's apply it
Right.
presently. It's hard
Right.
when you start going back. Uh, but for me, I do have which a lot of people would disagree with, that are evolutionists, that there is actually there's an underlying drive, that, again, I believe that it's the expression of something underlying. So I don't believe that, yeah, I don't believe in
Like God.
protein. It could be, yeah, like that, yeah,
Well,
that
let's
definition of
call the
God is,
underlying thing God,
yeah,
for
that
lack
would
of a
be,
better term.
for me, that the main thing is just that but it wouldn't be a creator. It actually is, like, evolution, like we actually are that. We are an expression of that, not a creation. I guess that's the only difference. It's not, maybe it's semantic, but sometimes it gets problematic when I don't look at myself. If we're going to call that God, then I am an expression of God, not a creation of God, would be. maybe it's semantic, maybe it's not, but
Why would you object to the term created?
because it's separate and then one and then that's once I go into this that there's something and then
There's
it created something else and then we're in this temporal realm and temporal or spatial realm almost. So it's I for me everything is one. That's one of the like I to me
I
when
see. I
one
see.
of the fundamental like cores of my thing. So I've got all these evolution is big in there, theory of relativity on space-time, temporal, non-material, and everything is one. To me, to separate the those that underlying nature of reality and me to separate and I could and actually I talked to when I talked to Paul Binder I talked about this because he I didn't really know what I always heard the Trinity and I didn't know what it was and when he was explaining it he said you know that there is this there's the God and then in order for God to kind of interact in our realm he had to materialize himself, and that's Jesus. And then there was very little talk about this spirit, I guess. And then I kept asking about that, and it's like, no, that's it. That's to me, that's it. And
The Holy Spirit.
if you're looking at the Trinity, to me, I'm not no disrespect, but Jesus and God are this. That's what I'm saying exists. That Holy Spirit that when at least from his perspective, he is talking about the Holy Spirit is how they connect. And that's always been my question. Yeah, how would they communicate with each other?
Well,
And then
they're not, they're one. They're not separate. They're one person, or they're one God in three people, right? And
or three are the people or Jesus is the person and the other ones
no,
are
they're three people. There's God the Father, there's the Holy Spirit, and there's Jesus Christ, and that's one God in three people. Um, that's the doctrine of the Trinity in any event. But I think like the the love of the Father and the Son creates the third person. Their perfect communion, their perfect understanding of each other creates another person in much the same way that the love between a man and a woman creates another person, right? This is a physical sign of a spiritual reality. um, that's the idea as I understand it. I'm not a theologian.
okay.
I'm not a clergyman. That's my understanding as a believer. But do you know that Henley poem Invictus? You know, I am the captain of my soul. You know that poem?
Uh it sounds familiar, but yeah, well, give me a
In Invictus. Okay, let me see here. I've never liked this poem, but I don't want to prejudice you. Um, yeah, by William Ernest Henley, Invictus. And I'll actually send it to you here.
okay. You want to read it's
Uh,
short or short
but
enough?
I'll read it.
Okay.
I'll read it. So out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade. And yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. Um, I think this is the ethos of the secular atheist. I mean, he says, you know, if there's hell, I'll go, whatever. But um, I've always thought this is a very silly thing to say. And the
Hmm.
reason I think it's a silly thing to say is because, and you're free to disagree with me. I'd like to hear what you think. But for me, it's like you didn't decide when you would be born. Most of us don't decide when we leave. We don't decide to get cancer or drop dead of a heart attack. And there are people who smoke and drink until they're 99, right? And there are people who, you know, slip out of life at 15 or 25 because they get a tumor in their brain and it's inoperable and they just go, right? And it seems random. I don't know that it's random. I don't know why these things happen. But it seems to me we're not in charge of what happens to us in this life. We can kind of decide how we respond, but then some of that has to do with your temperament and your wisdom. And you don't decide how wise you are or whether you're prone to panic or whether you're prone to bravery. Almost nothing about you is a decision you made, um, with very few exceptions. And that's not to say I don't believe in free will. I do. But I don't think that we know as much as we pretend to know. And I don't think that we're as um, powerful in our own lives as we think we are. Um, I think we're in somebody else's hands, if that makes sense. And so, whenever this poem gets thrown out, I feel like it's just arrogant.
Oh no, I agree that it is, and it's not that that's not to me when I that sounds like somebody who was raised Christian and was molested by somebody that yeah,
Well, I don't
mean
speculate.
they sound like they turned against Christianity rather than being like when I describe my position in I mean yeah if you call me atheist as a like a Buddhist is atheist. Buddha never actually addressed God. People would ask him about God, and
Right,
he just kind of
right,
smiled, half smiled at him. That's more of so and there's an atheist that is like anti-Christian, and those people were raised to believe in God and then stopped believing in God. I've had people ask me that. What made you stop believing in God? Like I said, I've never developed that concept. So it's not like I'm anti. So anyway, I agree that sounded very arrogant to me, and it sounded very but just the idea of I have difficulty with both actually a Buddhist perspective of the self and a Christian perspective of the self. That's actually one of the biggest question or the biggest things that I'm trying to wrap my head around is do I exist? Because Buddha he's got some very good uh points on what exactly what is it that I I when I talk about the self, I talk about
right.
me all the time. There's definitely something that I can feel is me. Um, but does that go in? And we don't know that we didn't choose to become in this world. In some ways, I do visualize like jumping into this world, like choosing to be here and for maybe a purpose. And maybe we knew it back then, and maybe I don't know how we come into this world and how we leave, but I don't think I do believe that we something existed before. I don't believe that life or consciousness is from conception or even during that period of growth. I believe that
Well, it
it
comes at some point
came
during
in
that growth.
something and
Yeah,
it perhaps before. I mean, it could be the driving force that brought those
right.
people
Well,
together to make love.
sure. I mean, I'm mainly saying like that there doesn't seem to be anything that I could point to that would confirm what Henley is claiming, right? That I'm the master of all of this, that I decide. I mean, that you can
Yeah.
get
No,
really solipsistic and
yeah.
get to a place where it's like I'm creating everything and I created myself, but I don't think that's or that I summon myself into being and I'm manifesting you. Like that's just
No.
solipsistic.
I
And
and
and I would I would point out that it doesn't appear we're in all that much control of all that much,
No, no,
on some level.
no, no.
And
I,
yeah, that's all.
yeah, no, no, I agree, and I see the problem with that. I mean, I see that that is what leads to where we're at right now. I mean that's problematic. No, that's very problematic. My main thing would just be that I don't think a Buddhist perspective would lead you to that thinking. It almost is the
No, I
Christianity
don't think Buddhism
perspective
is
or somebody
solipsistic.
that has a Christian framework that turns against it would lead to that.
Right,
Not
something satanic.
Yeah, yeah. Again, and satanic is to me, if you're satanic, you're Christian or you were Christian at one point. Like, you know what I mean? I can't.
Well, satanic is the inversion of the good, right? Satanic is to say, whatever's true, I want to make a lie. Whatever's good, I want to make bad.
Oh,
Whatever's beautiful, I want to make ugly. That's satanic.
okay,
That's
that's interesting. Yeah,
trying to
look at it
subvert
that way.
whatever is of God, right?
Okay,
Whatever is of the good, the highest good, I want to pervert it into the evil,
okay,
right?
well, okay. That's a good. Yeah, I never had a good definition for it. That's a good definition that helps. Um, and,
Well,
and
and there's probably that in Buddhism too, right? Because
oh yeah,
the
absolutely. Oh
idea
no,
in
there is. Yeah,
Buddhism is that you have the
absolutely.
right mind, you have the
Yeah,
right
yeah, yeah,
action, you
absolutely.
have the right, all of
Yeah, yeah,
that,
absolutely.
which suggests that there is such a thing as good, as the right thing at the right time, the right action, the right speech, the right heart.
Mhm.
Um, and that what would be satanic would be the wrong speech and the wrong
Yeah, no,
action and the wrong
yeah,
heart.
yeah. No, no, I like that. I like that. That's very, very. That actually has helped. Kind of. No, no, I like that. I agree 100% with that. Um, and and the so I mean, there is a problem of the self. I want to throw one thing in, and I do want to get into this thing I mentioned. I think after our last talk, and I said, "Oh, I never got to this because it is something I'm interested
Sure.
in." And I came across so during my research on death, I talked to many different people, and I talked to a Jehovah Witness, which
Hmm.
said something very interesting to me, and something that now I'll take your thoughts on that. For me, I admit to me, I never really even this book helped me understand Catholicism and Protestant. I never knew really about that. He was talking about Martin Luther
Hmm.
and all the oh well okay I didn't realize and that actually is interesting too because it talks about ghosts and souls and stuff. So I
Hmm.
I learned a lot of interesting stuff. Um,
It's a good book.
it is, and like I said, sometimes I think he was expecting me to already know some things. He did pretty well explaining things for the layperson but sometimes I was like, oh wait, that didn't make sense. But um, so anyway, from my understanding, I would have before talking to this individual about death. We were talking about death, and then I thought Jehovah's Witness was Christianity, and maybe it is, maybe it's not. So it's not okay. So well, but yeah, he said something
It's
that I
outside of the bounds of what is considered to be Orthodox Christianity. It's an offshoot for sure,
okay,
but in terms of like traditional creedal Orthodox Christianity, they are kind of outside the fence, as are
and that
Mormons.
it was Jehovah Witness Mormon.
No, they're
No,
different.
oh, you're saying so is Mars. Yeah, they're not okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so but what having a conversation with him was actually that was actually his the way he was describing God actually was in a lot more in line with me than a traditional maybe Orthodoxy Christian. And he said, when you die, you become the breath of God. Again, there's a lot of terminology, but to me, that rung with me. Okay, yeah, like I feel like there is an individual me in this realm that I can identify as me, but before I was in this realm, I probably wasn't like me in this. I probably would. I probably came together in some form. Again, I always have these visuals that are
Sure.
hard
But
to.
what you're saying, that makes
And then
sense.
when you
Yeah,
die, you also I visualize. To me, I visualize. Again, it's not what I believe, but just from all my beliefs, I do have like placeholders, and my placeholder is when I die, I become the all. I was the all before, and then in this realm, I'm being I am very concentrated experience, and then I'll go back to that. So he described it as when you die, you become the breath of God again. And they said, and because part of it was like grieving and when like experiencing the love of um experiencing the death of a loved one, and we talked about this, and 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 it was comforting to him because the you know you're not, you don't have to, when you die, it's not like you're watching over people, or and you don't have to worry about them, that you just boom, you go back to the breath of God. Anyway,
Sure.
so that terminology again, to that, when God is framed in that way, I would consider myself more like, okay, I believe in God. That
So,
I believe
right.
in that in some form. That made sense to me. That
In Orthodox Christianity, it goes something like this, just so that you can compare and contrast, right? Um, you are an immortal soul with a body. You're not just a soul, you're not just a body. You're both of those things. And that when you are conceived in love or in the act of love, um, you're ensouled in that moment. That is the moment when God imbues this soul and body together. And that when you die, um, some aspect of your spirit is with Christ, is with God, but it's not like you go to heaven and St. Peter's Gate and all that stuff. You're in sort of a holding pattern until Christ comes back to judge the quick and the dead on the last day. When he does that, all of the dead will stand up and be judged. And those who have chosen God, chosen the side of God, chosen or been elected to be God's people will get new bodies, glorified bodies, much in the same way probably that Jesus's body was glorified on the mountains of transfiguration and was like made out of light or something, but it's a physical thing. And the heavens and the earth will pass away, and a new heavens and a new earth will be made for people, and they will live there eternally in the presence of God. And those who are judged to be against God, don't want any part of it, will go and be without him. And what that amounts to is a place without goodness and without truth and without beauty, because he represents all of those things, right? And a place without him would be without those things. And so there's a very physical dimension to the Christian idea, a very material dimension, in the sense that you're not a soul, piloting a meat mech. You're a body and a soul. And the materialists would say, well, you're, sort of a chemical, a chemistry set driving a meat suit, right? But that's not what the Christians would say. And so this is why the tradition in Christian orthodoxy is generally to bury the dead instead of to burn them, in the recognition that they will rise again. Now, if they've been burned, obviously God can probably, manage that just fine. But it's sort of a recognition that you're going to rise again, is the idea.
Yeah.
And that you are being made. So C.S. Lewis says that you've never met a mortal soul. You've only met immortals. And we're all on a trajectory, either to become a more heavenly being or to become a more hellish being over the course of our lives. That's the Orthodox Christian view, laid out as well as I can lay it out for you, in case you hadn't heard it or something.
That's good. I mean, yeah, I get pieces here and there, and there may be different perspectives, so that helps. I mean, is that's your view, or as well, or
I think
or is it?
I'm very hesitant around eschatology, in the sense eschatology means the end of the world, right?
Okay.
Writing about the end of the world.
Okay.
There are people who say, oh, the book of Revelation says it'll go like this, and other people who say, no, it'll go like that. And I think the book of Revelation is full of a lot of very symbolic imagery, a lot of dream imagery, because it's a dream that was sent to the Apostle John. And it's open to a great deal of interpretation. The things that I've laid out for you seem to be pretty clear, pretty explicit, but like, we're going to blow this trumpet and then these 7 stars and then this beast is going to go and do that. That's up for interpretation. And all prophecy makes sense looking backward. It's hard to know looking forward what that means, right? Yeah. So I hold a lot of it pretty loosely in terms of what literally is going to happen. But as a broadly spiritually true thing, yeah, I think that's broadly spiritually true. Will it mean literal new bodies and new heavens and new earth? It very possibly could. Will it mean some kind of a metaphysical reality where we exist in something that is, here's where I end, at the tips of my fingers, and there's where you begin at the tips of yours? That's very possible. But I always hesitate to get real certain about stuff like that. I'm pretty certain about Jesus rising again because, again, like, there are events in history that are said, like, in living memory, hey, this took place, you could go ask this person. And that book has continued. So I think there must be something to it, or the first century audience would have not converted in their hundreds of thousands, right? Because Christianity exploded for the first 300 years, and they had no temporal power. They were persecuted by Rome. They were persecuted by the Jews, not all the Jews, but like the Pharisees and things. And yet it catches on like wildfire in a largely pagan world. How does that happen? Why do so many Jews believe it in the Holy Land? So I think that's a historical matter. But prophecies in the future, I can't look back at it. So I sort of reserve judgment for it'll happen however it happens.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I like the symbolic perspective of things that we, and like you said, I mean, with language is something we've developed and may express things differently. So even somebody said one thing, even if they meant it literally, the words could have some sort of,
well,
the way they describe
Bible
it
is pretty faithful about that, right? Like, there are two theories of translation, and there are translations for both. And you can go back to the Greek of the Old Testament, right? Or you can go back to the Aramaic or the Hebrew of the Old Testament. And there are people who, they translate the book literally, word for word. This word means this word means that. And then there are people who do concepts, right? So you're not going to get this metaphor or this joke. So I'm going to translate it into a similar adjacent metaphor or joke in our language. And they've done both. And the records show actually that, because there's a huge record for the Bible in terms of document record, that what we have today is incredibly faithful to the ancient documents. So it's not even that, as much as what I'm saying is, like, there are 7 stars in the book of Revelation. You say, oh, these are the 7 cities of, this and that. Or 7 is the number of completeness. So it really means that, like, there are many interpretations. It's not so much linguistic interpretation as it is like, 7 stars could mean any number of things. I'm not going to get married to one interpretation.
Sure. Okay. So this actually does tie in a little bit to where my research went in psychology. If you're maybe it's a good time to kind of go into that. So let me give you a little background and ask you some questions as they relate to this, but also
sure,
maybe a different avenue. And I tried to. So first, I'll give you my research questions were basically the prerequisites for a volunteer would be that they've lost somebody that they loved, and that they had meaningful conversations with them in the end, And
Mm.
and then I talked to him, and so it was so again, and this kind of goes into the thing, and I don't claim this to be like a hard science anyway, and there's a lot of subjectivity to it, and I like subjectivity, and I can tell you do too. We're not, I don't think we're anti-subjectivity, but I do
No, no.
also notice that that's also the problem where we're at. So I want to leave that kind of aside. We could come back to that. So it is 100%.
Right. No, subjectivity is a fact in
Oh,
that you're having an experience and I'm having an
yeah.
experience and they're different experiences, right? Or
Yeah.
maybe they're similar, but they could never be exactly the same.
Yeah.
But subjectivity doesn't override objectivity. That is to say,
Sure.
if Mount Vesuvius erupts, that's an objective fact. The way you die and the way
Yeah.
I die subjectively might be different,
Good. Yeah.
but objectively we're both dead because
Yeah.
objectively the mountain blew up,
Good. Yeah.
right? So there's the problem is when they say, well, everything is subjective. No,
Yeah.
everything isn't,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's when it's a problem.
Good. 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 Okay. Good. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think we're on. I think we recognize that as I think we're on point there. Um, and then so yeah. So my research, 100%. It's a subjective. I forget what I mean. Yeah, it was a phenomenological study. Those were my questions. I wanted
Fair
to
enough.
help. I wanted to the experience of death as
Sure.
and then I would let it. It would be I had some interview questions that kind of would help form the discussion, but I would leave it up to the person to describe
Mm.
it their own way.
Mm.
And and what and it was and I had people of all different faiths and religions, I that and actually ultimately I don't think the question is really relevant too much to these things except in one area. Or let me just go. So my questions were basically I wanted to know, and it goes into like we don't choose how we die, and so it kind of goes into that poem. But I have a theory in my theory, and it's again they always say this about psychologists and psychological theories that their theories are pretty much just an introspection of themselves. So
Yeah, they're
this
projecting.
actually
Yeah,
like they're kind of psychoanalyzing themselves and then
sure.
and projecting it to the
Right.
human psyche.
Well, that's
They're,
certainly what Freud did a lot of.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, he did. Yeah, no, it's funny. It's like, well, you've just we know a lot about you, man.
Right.
And so I do the same thing. So and this goes back to my project on my land
Right.
that I want, and I do hope, like I said, in 2040 is when I'm going to start it for sure. But you're welcome anytime before that. But that's when I'm going to have like an annual 2 month period where I just invite, just come by, stop here for a couple of days, and then go, do some sightseeing or tours or something. I mean, I for me. So basically, my point is this research actually did come out of my own introspection on the self
Sure.
and the meaning of like I my I think again I'm gonna kind of blanket it on people, but you can say if you will also agree with this at the end. But let me describe the whole thing is that um we we should, and that is a sometimes problematic term, but I think that we should prepare for our ideal death. At the same time, of course, we have to be accepting of that we don't have control, that I may die at any point for any reason, terrific or horrific accident, get hit by a train or terrible disease or something. But it would still be a good idea to have an idea of how I do want to die. And sometimes I
Right.
think people are so, because I asked a lot of people this question. So this was one of the questions that I would ask towards the end of the interview after they've talked about the experience of losing a loved one. And I asked them questions about and the conversation of that person. I was surprised how many people actually would avoid the fact that they're in the room with somebody dying and they didn't ask them questions, and they always regret like I should have asked them like this and that. And and they were, it was awkward for them. So the part of my research was kind of uncovering this uncomfortability that we have with death,
Sure.
and avoidance of some questions that we would love to have had with our loved ones. And we actually had the opportunity, and we just kind of like,
Sure.
hey, so did you see? And they start talking about some meaningless, the game, the whatever conversations that they had with them their whole life. They would go back to that instead of asking them like, wow, this is your chance to ask the deepest questions possible. And then I asked them, so basically I'd ask the question point blank first, like, how do you want to die? And then a lot of people would answer like in ways that, I don't have control, and that's good that they don't have death anxiety, that they're willing to die at any point, because we could die at any point.
Sure.
But let's just assume that we don't. Let's assume that we are provided the opportunity to, live until organ failure,
Mm.
which is probably, I think that's how we die, cancer or organ failure. I mean, something's going to
Sure.
stop, our heart's going to stop, our brain. You know, most people, if that is, they'd want to go peacefully, not necessarily in your sleep. And so this actually goes, and it does tie back into one thing a little bit in Buddhism. It's called like Mahama Samadhi, which is the like great meditation, which is, and I hope to achieve this. This is my goal, is to consciously go. To actually, I feel like if, again, if we reach the state where we're just like eventually our organs are gonna fail, that I'd have some sort of conscious control of, I could last another day if I wanted to, or I could just, it's kind of like when you're really sleepy, maybe you're driving though, so like you're gonna,
Right.
you're dozing off, you're able to, and then you you wouldn't be able to do that forever, but you can go an extra half hour, extra 45 minutes,
Sure.
and then boom, hit the pillow, and you do have some control of that. I hope to be able to. I wouldn't claim that I have complete control of when I die, but I'm
Well, you
hoping
hear
to
a lot
have.
of stories about that, right? You hear stories about people who they're, my daughter's on the train, and then they wait until their daughter's
Yeah,
there
yeah,
and says goodbye, and then they can give up the ghost.
yeah, yeah, and
Yeah,
I think that's beautiful. I think that would be a good way to go. So for me, that would be um something that I hope. But I guess my underlying theory is that a lot of people avoid having a perfect death because some uncomfortability with it. That, again, first you'd have to buy into my theory that we should have that, and then if it is, what is it now for everybody? Of course, that's going to be different, and then that what it is would obviously, if you have a religious belief about an immortal soul, or but even for actually, and again, this was actually in a way wasn't the purpose, but what I found is that there is some commonality even for an atheist that believes they're gonna die and it's just you're dead, you're done, and that's not my view at all.
oblivion. Right.
But if that were your view, even then, there might be some significant for your final thought, right? Or
Sure.
to end on a good note, right? I still think even across the spectrum of possibilities that people have for this, whatever this is that it's something, something exists, right?
Right. We're
Uh,
here.
uh, and and that we can all kind of have these goals for this life,
Sure.
and there were a lot of uh repetitive things that came up amongst Christians, Buddhists, atheists that had it. So before I get into some of them, and I can give you some of my results, but without, I don't want to influence you by others, and maybe just
Sure.
you have
Yeah.
some
Yeah. Lay
thoughts.
it
So
on me,
it
man.
can go religious and spiritual, but also just practical too as
Sure. Sure.
well.
Okay. So, what do
Shit.
you want me to?
So
Is
yeah,
this
yeah. I guess I should, if this had been my research with the interview, I wouldn't have led you on that much. But
sure?
the first question would be just, yeah, do you have an ideal? Do you have a way you would like to die? Um,
Sure.
First, have you thought about it? Do you have like an ideal death? Like, this is how I'd want to go, and
So I can't give you a positive scenario per se, but here are some things I don't want.
Mhm.
Um, I don't want to die in a hospital. Um, I don't want to die among strangers
Mhm.
unless it's a situation where I did something to help someone live, and I'm on the street and pushed a cat out of the way and the bus hit me.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying I'm that
Yeah,
super
yeah, yeah,
heroic
yeah, yeah.
whatever. I'm just saying, like, if that were to
Noble
like
cause.
happen because something in my brain fired off and I just did something, and
Yeah.
that was the end. um
Cat. You said a cat, not a kid.
a kid.
Oh, I thought you said a cat. I was like, wow,
And I
that's
don't mean a goat
definitely
either.
a
I mean
noble.
like a
I
human
love
child.
cats. I'm a cat lover. That's
No, I
very
like cats too, but I don't
yeah.
know if I want to die for a cat. But
See,
so, but
yeah.
what I'm saying is that ideally not alone, or among strangers, I guess.
Mhm.
um I don't want to die frightened,
Sure.
you know
And terrified.
um but and ideally it would be something that would be sudden rather than some lingering death or dementia where you lose yourself an inch at a time. um at least up here, maybe your heart is what it is, but um I don't think I want to be so old that I've lost everybody, and I'm the last to go. um I hope that I will have done what I was supposed to do.
Mhm.
um that at some point it's like, because I mean, to some extent I think men are the more expendable, right? Women can make life. Men should protect that life. They should protect the young. They should protect their brothers and their fathers. But like,
After that, you're not as useful. Or
yeah, when if you're going to be expendable
you got
and you die doing one of those things, that's okay,
okay, yeah.
right? But if you come to a place where it's like you've raised up your kids and they're doing their own thing and they're okay, right?
Yeah.
You linger on for another 40 or 50 years and watch yourself fall apart and hope that you go first and not your wife
Mhm.
because you don't want to lose her, right? Like, nah. I mean, I think about the Hagakure, right? The book of the samurai. And
Yeah.
it says in that book that you should think every day, if you're a samurai, you should think every day about being ripped apart by wild animals and having parts of your body cut off in battle and
Yeah.
being killed in various and sundry ways, so that when those things happen, you will have already spent time thinking about it and you won't be so shocked in the moment that you can't act.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, um, I'm not a soldier anymore. I don't want to make war on anybody anymore.
Mhm.
Um, I'd like to live peacefully.
Yeah.
Um, but if God forbid somebody were to come in church with a gun one Sunday morning, I'd hope that I could help. If it's got to be me and not others, then let's have it be that.
Mhm. Yeah.
But I say that now. You never know how you're going to react in the moment.
Sure.
Um, so I don't know if I'm brave, but
Mhm.
um, if I were writing the story of my end, I'd rather write that story than, he died squeaking and shitting himself in bed,
Yeah. Yeah. Which
right?
is basically most people actually, or if you do the end, yeah, if you make it to the end, if the end could be like that.
Yeah, that doesn't interest me.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, those are yeah, the first question or the first answers that come to mind usually are yeah. To get a good idea of how we want to die, we do got to start. Okay, this is definitely how I don't want to die,
Right, right.
and and then, but in that, and you said a lot of things. It does kind of create uh what it is, and and so and that was a big one. The first one you said not die in a hospital, and that was actually my first. I wrote a lot of papers on it, and this kind of goes off, but I do want to touch on this. I'd I I've always been like, yeah, I don't believe in medical intervention for things, injuries. Cool, like if I'm injured, I appreciate some medical help, but like as far as having any control over my health, actually this has been huge. And this is kind of how my mother raised me, kind of more like hippie mentality, I would say. And that's actually, again, I'm gonna come back a little bit into my research, but one thing we didn't that I did kind of want to touch on that was weird, and because we did talk about like Fauci and stuff and all this, is like I come from a liberal raising hippie type thing, and I voted for Jill Stein in 2016, and she was like anti-vaccine. These were all like to me, this like anti-medical establishment was a very liberal uh kind of view, and
I think it was,
it was right.
and now it's on the right.
Yeah, and that's so that is kind of this coalition that coming, and that I'm looking for. And also with evolution, a lot of these things were like evolution based. I trust my body, I trust my ancestors, I trust the environment that my ancestors have lived in to not start tweaking around with
Right.
all these things. And that's very compatible with, hey, my body's, I'm created by God, and I have,
Right.
I'm so even though our maybe some root differences, we agree on this idea that that there we shouldn't just be playing God for was
Right.
one term that
Right.
that a
Hmm.
conservative would use. But I would also kind of appeal to the same idea, but from just my body I have a robust immune system that I've um my ancestors have provided me with, or whatever.
Right.
Um so so that one's and that goes back into not wanting to die in a hospital, which is very that was a very common one. And it's
Right.
funny though, and actually I wrote a paper on this. It might have got published. In my dissertation I haven't published yet. I'm trying to get it in a better journal, and I was I got in these like off. I was able to publish some opinion papers in some like just journals that weren't
Hmm.
really
Hmm.
high. They weren't predatory. They didn't ask me to pay them. I had a lot of those people. And I was like, no, I'm not gonna pay you to publish my journal, but
Right. Right.
but I am willing to change stuff around and meet whatever
Right.
requirements are needed. And one of them were like, why do so many people die in hospitals? Because here I'm asking all these people, I'm like, nobody wants to die in a hospital, but like 70% of Americans do. And
Right.
and then one of the answers is because we start giving like, basically, if you look at a hospital as having really anything to say about your health,
Right.
um, you're gonna die in a hospital most likely.
Right.
If you go to a hospital because you're sick, then you're definitely gonna go to a hospital when you're really sick. So
Right.
so um
Well,
so
and not only that, but like once you're admitted, if you're too sick to get up and walk
yeah,
out,
they're not gonna,
you're
yeah,
you're staying. They're not going to turn you out,
yeah,
right? And that's it's not because they're doing something that is wrong. They're doing what they think is right.
yeah.
But it's like if you can't walk out, then that's where you're going to stay.
Yeah, and that so many people end up in that uh position, and yeah, and from medical perspective, their goal is to prolong life. I mean, and
Right.
that's the way that, I mean, they're seeing it tunnel vision. They're not looking
Right.
at it from a different perspective. So that kind of ties into what I'm doing here. I want to die on my land. Like that is my goal. To again, I might die in a car accident today on the way to the store or something. But and part of it, and although I've had some change of views. Like I don't actually would like to die alone, but not up and like at the moment of death. I don't want to actually, like, I don't want. If somebody wants to hold my hand, I guess they could, but it's like I rather not. I rather just detach myself, I guess, from, right. I don't want to miss it. My last thoughts are, I don't want to have like the feeling of like I'm going to miss you guys. So it's like, why even have them there at that very moment? I kind of visualize like an animal. Like I would love to be, if whoever I'm with. Again, that's why I want to have. I hope to create this sanctuary, like I said, enough that it appeals to my generation of people, that when they're at this age that they come and visit and have conversations. I want to have that. I want to have communication up until the end. But like at that very moment, I don't actually. I kind of like to just be by myself and let do it.
Yeah, I don't have preferences that way, I think, as
Yeah,
long as it's not like,
completely like
you know, um the factory model,
give
you
me that.
know, has infected the world,
Oh, okay.
right? And it's like it makes it so people aren't really people anymore, they're just numbers.
Hmm.
And I think that can happen like in hospice, and not always. Like there's some really wonderful people in hospice that, they ease people on their way. But if you end up at a kind of a dodgy hospice or something like that, then it's like you're just a number.
Yeah. Well, by
um
hospice, you mean as a physical location?
yeah.
I mean, because my
I
dad
mean,
was when he was on hospice, but that was just
yeah, sometimes you
he
go to
got
their
to live.
house, right?
Oh yeah,
Right.
he lived with us until that was the only time I've been back to America. And he wrote some cryptic messages. He was always real spiritual in this thing, talking about spiritual journey. I'm just like, I'm gonna go back because that sounded really weird. And I actually went back and got to spend some time with him. And this is like 2018, and he's from Pennsylvania, so I flew there, and then he flew back at the same. It was I timed it when I had to renew my visa in Thailand, so I went to LA and I had some friends
Right.
there. They had a Thai embassy there, so I got it. And he actually died on before I arrived back, very peacefully, um, in his sleep. I kind of wanted to be there with him, but then in some ways, I think I felt like he actually wanted to do it on his own, and
Yeah.
or not. He didn't want. I could tell I don't think he wanted me. That I feel like he was able to choose when he went again within those couple days period.
Sure.
Kind
Sure.
kind of did it. He wanted to wait till he got back to my brother's house where he was staying, and died on the
Well,
sofa chair.
let me
Um,
ask you something
yeah,
then,
yeah.
and I'm sorry for your loss.
Okay.
um
No, it was beautiful. He actually inspired me to that's actually to like he had
sure.
yeah, but yeah, no, so it's,
Well, so I wasn't close with my father at all. He was not a good man. But I learned that he died because there was an obituary, and
yeah,
I on Google, like there it was,
yeah,
he's dead. And like I'm that whole generation's gone. He
yeah,
had a brother who died young, like in his 20s, and a sister who actually she was homeless and she was murdered on the campus of CSUMB some years back. Like another homeless guy, like beat her to death or whatever. Terrible thing.
yeah.
Um, but so I'm the only converse of my line. Like I'm the eldest
Yeah.
one. Now it happens that he set up franchises and had lots of other kids in other places, a few of whom I'm in touch with, but I'm the oldest.
Yeah.
So like looking behind me, there's no father, right? I'm the oldest one in the line. Is that true for you too? And how does that feel?
I'm the youngest. I have two older brothers.
Oh, so you have two older brothers.
Yeah. I have two older brothers, and they both had kids young. So and they've got kids. So yeah, yeah, he actually died at my oldest brother's house. Yeah, on
Mm.
my way up when I was coming up there. So yeah, um, for yeah,
But you still have the experience of like, there's no older generation to go to. You're the older generation then,
yeah,
right? Even if your brothers are a little older or whatever, it's like there's
yeah,
there's no generation behind us. We could go and be like, hey, this is my situation. Not that I'd ever gone to him. That's
yeah,
not the point. The point is like
sure.
now we're the elders in
Yeah,
some
no,
sense.
yeah. And yeah, my mom has an older brother, and my mom is actually here in Thailand. She has dementia,
Oh,
and
so okay, so you have your mom, and so you're
so
not.
yeah,
Well, I mean,
yeah,
I have my mom too, but I'm talking about
yeah,
on one side.
yeah. And then my dad has a younger brother and an older sister who's that they're alive. He actually had an
Well, that's good.
older brother who died recently, but so like I mean, but those I am I mean, I have memories of that generation when they were my age now. And so there is a definite like recognition of like,
Right.
okay, that's going to be me, because I remember when they were me, where I am now. So it puts it in perspective. Like that's while in my 20s I was invincible. I didn't
All
really,
right.
you know what I mean?
Totally.
Like I
Yes.
didn't that concept of death. So it's not like, I guess I think some people could have like a midlife crisis. Luckily, I don't. I feel actually I think this would prevent a midlife crisis by kind of creating that death, because it's far enough away, if assuming that we're able to live
Get to
healthily
that point.
and free
But
of
yeah,
terrible
but even
accidents.
just knowing you're going to die and being conscious of it and having a healthy understanding and acceptance of that,
Yeah,
I
is
think that that prevents the midlife crisis. I
yeah,
need to go
yeah,
do something crazy thing.
yeah,
Like
it, yeah, yeah.
that there's something to, and I think the reason COVID broke a lot of people's brains is because it was the first time it ever occurred to them in a serious way that they might have to go.
Mhm.
And they just could not accept it in some
Yeah,
cases.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
I think
it
that is.
created like this, like what did Cuomo say? The governor is like, there's nothing worse than death. Nothing. If you go out, if you do anything that's death, and there's nothing worse than that. And it's like, well, that's not true.
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
that's
yeah,
not, first of all, that's not true. But second of all, like you're gonna die of something at some point. Do you want to do it living your life or do you want to do it hiding in a hole?
yeah,
Like
absolutely.
it's
Yeah,
gonna visit you one way or the other. How do you want to live like a free person in the meantime, or do you want to live
yeah,
like a slave to your fear?
absolutely. No, that's core. Actually, that right there is a lot of what's going on right now, and and it is. Yeah, yeah, it's funny when this, I mean, yeah, these dudes came, actually, like we bought this land, uh, before all that broke out. My son was born actually right during that time, kind of before, right before, just like a month before. And so we were already, I mean, you could call me a prepper in a way, like for what? I don't have underground bunker with silos of food, but I do have
Well, not yet.
well water that I could like I do like being self-sustainable if needed. Like I'm not
Right.
fully self-sustainable now, just because out of convenience. It's much I actually we just harvested our first little batch of rice, man. That's not really worth all the trouble. Like rice is pretty easy, but it was fun to do. um
Right.
but like I could I could live without any, if you lock me in my land right now, we could live, because I got the pump. Haven't done it really. I do it every once in a while just to make sure it still operates and stuff. Most of the time, I
Right. Right.
like if I had no electricity and no anything, I want to just, for me, that's comfortable to know that I could survive. Also, for financial situations, it kind of gives you financial security to know that, okay, if I had no income, I could survive. Is nice. It's a nice feeling
Totally.
to have. Um,
Right.
Even though, like, I don't claim that I'm, most of the vegetables I buy are I buy them from the store because it's just easier, but
Sure.
and convenience. But I could be 100% self-sustainable at this very moment if needed. And by 2040, though, I am hoping to actually be that, actually live like that, just because it's kind of fun in a way. So it's funny that, and then this, and it's funny because I had always said, like, I don't like cities, always scare me, just because I see how all of the food is like, it's trucked in. It's like, what if
Right.
something happened and that line was stopped? This would be chaotic. I've always thought that. I've always looked in stores and just thought how unnatural it was that you're getting food this way, and water. So I always thought of water and food, and I think COVID gave that COVID changed the world in a good way in a lot of ways. It let us see these things. And it kind of accelerated, I think it accelerated some, maybe the powers that operate on money and power, or the
Sure. Sure.
but it also caused this kind of awakening uh amongst people, and a lot of divisions. And that's kind of where we're at. And again, that's kind of where I realized, like, wow, I thought a lot of the people I would have identified with before went in this direction, and
Right.
I find myself in with this more.
there was a
conservative.
huge,
Okay.
yeah, there's a psychological thing that happened, right? And it's still happening, like it's still
Yeah.
reverberating, but it's like here I am, like on the coast in California, right? There's still people walking around outside in the daylight wearing masks, right? It's not a lot, like it's
Yeah.
not as many as it
But yeah.
was, but like there was a time when it was like everybody. And
Yeah.
I, at some point, was like, this is nonsense. I'm not doing it. And I'd get dirty looks and whatever. But the like early on, everybody could be kind of forgiven. But at the point where like Fauci's like, it's no good. Oh, you need to do it. In fact, you need to do it twice. And you know, like more information's coming out. It doesn't really transmit outside, you know, stuff like that. So you shouldn't wear it outside. But there are people who are like driving alone in a car with a mask on, and
Yeah.
it's not it's either a surgical mask, which isn't doing anything, or it's a cloth mask, which is doing even less.
Yeah.
Um, and it's like this is something that's happened to you psychologically. This is not a medical thing. This is a social signal,
Hmm.
right? I'm part of the tribe of the masked versus the tribe of the unmasked, and that became very quickly the tribe of the vaxxed versus the tribe of the unvaxxed, and the tribe of the vaxxed was very exercised that everybody needed to be in their tribe.
Yeah.
Um, and it's like the whole thing revealed a lot of people's um, psychological makeup.
Yeah.
Um, and fear is this very powerful motivator, as we know.
Hmm.
And you can get a lot of people to comply with a lot of crazy things very quickly if you get them frightened enough. And my concern is an awful lot of people saw that. An awful lot of people in power, World Economic Forum people, um, big pharma people, like people in a position of serious power, people in the media got a sense of like we can really stir people up and rattle their cages if we want to and make them do things and even see their neighbors as threats.
Yeah.
um, and that's really frightening, because it shows you exactly the way that things like, you know, the climate that's set for the Holocaust took place, right? How is it that the German people came to this? Well, now we can kind of see, can't we?
Yeah.
um, it's not that hard to do. How is it that the Russian people accepted the Bolsheviks, you know, and then, you know, with Stalin's boot on their faces, lived through the terror? Well, now we know because
Yeah.
we've seen it in our own
Yeah.
time, in our own
Yeah.
generation. And um, here's something about being a Christian or being a Buddhist: you're not as frightened of death
Yeah.
as a secular materialist atheist, somebody like Cuomo, who says, uh, what's worse than death? Nothing's worse than death. Stay in your house.
I thought Cuomo was like Italian Catholic, wasn't he? Or I don't know.
Well, I don't know what he is, but he can't be much of a Catholic if he thinks there's nothing worse than death,
Yeah.
because that's not what the
I
church
know Chris.
teaches.
I saw Chris Cohen because I watched that PBD podcast.
Is
You watch it?
Andrew was it Andrew Cuomo was the
Okay,
governor?
yeah, and then Chris Cuomo is his
He was
brother,
the
and
media
I've never
personality.
actually heard Andrew, but I see, but he was talking about the incident. I didn't really know about that incident, but he was talking about it, and then he said he's raised. I don't know. He just said he's
I'm
Italian.
sure they were. Yeah, I mean, their father
Yeah,
Mario was the governor of New York for years and years. But the point is,
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah.
we're living in a moment of great fear.
Mhm.
And I think something like, you know, Klavan's book, right, is an antidote to that fear. Um, and it points the way towards something where people can live with some dignity and some hope in an orientation that says, okay, these are the good and the highest things. And self preservation is not sacred in the way that sacrifice for others is sacred, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so that's what the Christian God offers, is like actually sacrificing for others is a sacred thing to do, right? Um, I'm not making a utilitarian argument that that's the reason to adopt it. I would say adopt it because you think it's true, or don't. I happen to think it's true, but I'm not, selling you a car. Um, that's what Sheila LaBeouf said. He just converted to Catholicism, and he says it was because he was playing a part, Padre Pio, and he experienced the Latin Mass, and he felt like, oh, they're not trying to convert me. They're not trying to, his words, like sell me a car. They're addressing themselves to something that's bigger. Um, and that converted him. So that's sort of how I feel. Like I'm not interested in like telling you, hey, you have to convert to what I think. I'll just tell you what I believe is true and why I think it's good. Um, and if that doesn't convince you, that's the way it is. That's fine. You don't need to think what I think.
And and you see you're able to see. I mean, I'm sure the answer is yes, but I mean that to recognize that even not, we're still on the same team. We're still fighting to something.
Totally.
You know what I mean? I mean,
Absolutely.
it's weird. It's really weird to be in this position. This, like, I can't put my finger on it all the time, but even if it's not, even if we are describing it differently, we can
Right.
recognize that we're on the same team here,
We
and,
are.
and we're we're battling something that is. Here's the thing, though. I mean, I feel that was all they had. Not that they're not going to come back with something else, and they will
Right.
be like that was they went all out, or you know what I mean. Whoever wanted power saw that opportunity to seize more power. They're still doing everything they can, but they definitely weren't working in the shadows as they probably had been, and they might have been
Right.
making many small steps towards an authoritarianist society that who knows what
Right.
sort of, and by by blowing the veil off and
Yeah.
exposing it is scary for us to see how what
Right.
what controls they had. But I feel like that ultimately that kind of made them that they lost a lot. That veil was
Right.
one of their strengths. That
Well, that's what they say. Daylight is a great disinfectant, right? And there's been a lot of daylight shed, um, and so it's never been more clear to me how much power the pharmaceutical companies have. Um, and the more I think about it, the more I'm like, oh, you know what? Medicalization of human nature, of the human experience,
yeah,
is the source of an awful lot of our conflicts right now. So you think about something like, okay, I'm not happy or I'm anxious. Oh, you have depression. We have diagnosed you.
yeah,
You're not supposed to feel this way.
yeah. Craven was
Here's a pill. And
talking.
it's like, wait a minute. How do you know how somebody is supposed to feel? Maybe there's something wrong, like we are a creature that's used to moving in groups from 200 to about 50,
Mhm.
in like kin groups and clan groups, and not being alone as much as we're alone, and not being isolated like we're isolated, and having the connections and bonds of kinship and those obligations and responsibilities on us. Maybe doom scrolling alone in your apartment isn't good for you because of that, and it's not a pill you need to anesthetize you to that ache, that need for human connection, right? But equally, um, you're a woman and we're going to give you a pill so that you can have sex the way that men have sex without any concern about getting pregnant.
Yeah.
And that's going to change your sense of smell, and it's going to change some of your personality, and it's going to
Oh,
change your selection in mate,
yeah.
and some of your behavior,
Oh, yeah. And
and might give you cancer later. We don't know. Don't worry about that. Take the pill so you can be equal
yeah,
in
yeah.
your behaviors. And it's like, that's been a big shift. And then like we're going to medicalize having a you don't want a baby, we'll treat it like it's a sickness and have a procedure to just get that baby out of there. And we won't call it a baby, we'll call it something else. So you don't think about it as a person.
Yeah, yeah,
And like all of these medical procedures and pharmaceuticals fundamentally change what has been the human condition into something that we can intervene and eliminate consequences, but create new consequences, right? That are at issue in our society. Oh, you feel like a girl? Well, we'll just cut off your penis and we'll give you fake breasts and we'll call you a girl.
yeah.
It's another medical
Oh yeah.
procedure that's supposed to give people a sense of, and like, I've just become deeply, deeply distrustful of not individual doctors necessarily, but of the
Sure.
institutions
Oh
that
yeah, yeah,
run medicine
yeah, yeah.
and of
Established.
pharmaceuticals broadly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's yeah, that's and it's funny because it has become more. And this was I was writing about like early, before the pandemic, uh, you know, came out, and now, but now it's there's now it's kind of become mainstream, and now there's um yeah, it's funny when like, but this this was already there, like this was already something that was
Right.
going on, and like talking about it, sometimes when you talk about it, then then it's
You sound like a crazy. You
yeah.
sound like a
Before
conspiracy theory,
I would
right?
actually get more, I would have more people buying into it when it wasn't when it was a fringe theory in some ways.
Right.
I had more yeah, there was uh more interest almost, and then so I mean, yeah, I guess, and a lot about this conversation is kind of like where do we go now, because there are there, and it was funny. So if you um and we talked about Brett Weinstein and Harry Hine, that Dark Horse podcast, and they're talking about it. He was kind of identifying these things, and
Right.
this concern is among the dissonance, and he talks about him as like, hey, at least we have a lot of, and it is a variety of people, but these are
Right.
actually the best thinkers. These are the people who are willing to have uh and we there is a track record. We can see who
Right.
early on, and it's okay if it took time for some people to wake up and recognize
Sure.
these things, but he is kind of warning us of, I think, by because they were actually warning us early on about things that we didn't see coming, and
Right.
I do feel that this is the new area where among the COVID dissonance. I don't even like talking using that
Well,
term,
not necessarily even
but
COVID, but just dissident in terms of like,
yeah,
I'm not going along with this
yeah,
program,
yeah,
this corporate WHO, World Economic
yeah,
Forum, sort of
yeah,
globalist um, box
yeah,
of perverse interests that are all kind of uniting to push ordinary people around. We can fly around in our private planes, but climate change says you can't have this kind of heater. You
yeah,
can't have this kind of stove. You should eat the bugs and live in the pods. And we'll tell you when the environment's been saved.
yeah, yeah,
Um, like that, whatever that is,
yeah. That's
that's a hard pass. That's a no from
yeah,
me,
and
right?
yeah, and
But I
there's
think a lot of people don't see it, or they don't recognize it for what it is. Um, and it sounds crazy
yeah,
because it is crazy,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
But if you see it, you see it.
Yeah, it's and so I am kind of out here away from society. From my perspective, I feel like there is though there is a large it's hard to put in a percentage, but I feel like I, I actually have a positive view. Not that there won't be but because the veil has been lifted, and as yeah, Brett Weinstein kind of talked about this, the dream team. I mean,
Right.
it put a lot of unlike-minded people realize like, hey, we've got a lot more similarities, and that's kind of what I'm talking here. Is like
But it's like herding
we agree
cats,
on
right?
some
Because we're all
actually,
so different.
yeah, and so there, I guess, moving forward, there could be or there, yeah, there will be issues about like uh the small things. So it's that's what I appreciate about this conversation so much is realizing like, wow, actually how the big, right? If there's a hierarchy of good that we
Right.
can agree on some, like these things have to be addressed. We have to, this is not going down.
It all comes back to the truth, right? If you and I are earnestly striving to get to the truth, it doesn't really matter if you're over here and I'm over here, because you neither of us were always there, right? We're always traveling towards something.
Yeah,
Who knows where it's going to end up?
yeah,
So famously in the Screw Tape Letters, right, which is C.S. Lewis is writing a book that's just letters back and forth from Uncle Screwtape, a demon in hell, to his nephew, a demon who's trying to damn a particular man's soul, his client's soul.
yeah,
And Screwtape says, and I really love this, he says, do not awaken his argumentation. That is, don't awaken the client's argumentation.
yeah,
Because even if you win the argument for the time being, our enemy can argue as well. In other words, if you get somebody thinking,
yeah,
maybe
yeah.
they don't think what you think right away, or they don't see the truth
But
right away.
yeah,
But once they're awake and they start, where that chain of events
yeah,
goes, right,
yeah.
where
That's
that
good.
thinking goes,
Yeah,
you don't know. And the truth can argue for itself.
yeah,
So if we're all oriented toward truth, even if we don't all arrive at this. So, I mean, this is the
yeah,
part of the church, right? We're writing, this is a book about Christianity, and it talks about, well, there's Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy and Anglicanism and Protestantism, right? Those all confess Christ. All of them say we're worshiping the same God, right? Their traditions are all very different, right? They see things differently. They interpret the texts of Scripture differently to mean different things. That's okay. It's really okay, because they're all pointed at what they think is the highest good for them. Like, what's the truth? What's the most beautiful thing in the universe? Let's walk toward that. And we're doing that same thing. You're trying to find out what's true, and so am I, by what tools we've been given,
hmm,
right? And so that's all you need to be on the same team, um, is to earnestly be trying to find the truth and asking yourself, is that true? Over and over and over.
yeah, yeah,
And it's a refining process. And that's why I think it's no surprise to me that there's an awful lot that you and I see eye to eye on, even though we're coming at it from different angles, is because there is some such a thing as the truth, and we're both trying to walk toward it. You know, in the larger, in the
yeah,
metaphysical
yeah.
sense, and
Absolutely.
in the sense of reality.
Yeah, yeah. And so to put in our current times into this state, I actually it makes me want to go back a little bit more. I mean, in history, because of the similarities.
Right.
I mean, they, like I said, well, they did it. They managed to,
Right.
but then I think, well, did they? Because or is this
No, they did,
did they
but
leave something open? Is that what is this a continuation, or is it a complete cycle that has recyclicated?
no, well, right. But what they had then was poetry. Poetry probably isn't going to get us out of it this time, right? It's
Yeah.
going to have to be something new for a new age. What that is, I don't know. You
Okay.
don't know,
Okay.
right?
Maybe podcast. Yeah.
But yeah, and it may
Well,
be
it's
long form
long form. It's
discussions.
funny. It is the long form. It's discussion. It's so it's beautiful to just have these long discussions and to listen to them. Like I don't. It's like sometimes you, oh, you listen to podcasts or something. It's like it's just like it's refreshing to hear just thoughts and like even we go sometimes all over here and it doesn't really make sense. Sometimes I'm not well articulated. I mean, it's nice to listen. The best podcasters usually are well articulated, but I mean, but they're also thinking on their feet and ask questions
Sure.
that they've probably given responses to somewhat, but
Well,
it's not
conversation
rehearsed.
is an art,
It's
right?
not like these clips. I mean, I don't like the uh I mean, there are always sound bites to get, but it's really just listening to the a long
Right.
form, and the politicians too. I mean, like I gotta admit, just listening to Putin for 3 hours, just take questions is like he makes sense about a lot of stuff. It's like whether I appreciate a political leader that can at least sit up and just respond, and that's what I'm saying. I mean, now of course that's going to be a big part in 2024 election and stuff. It's just like I want to see these people just sit down and just talk to somebody.
Right. Well, and
I
that's what
don't
makes
agree with them,
I
but at
like
least I can see
whatever
you're a
you
real person.
right,
Like,
and whatever you think, whether you're Democrat, Republican, whoever's listening, whatever, it's like that's one of the big problems I have with them putting Biden forward is like this guy's clearly not with it,
yeah,
and he can't really respond to things, and it's like if you think your ideas are good, put somebody up there who can articulate your ideas and may the best idea win. But of course,
yeah.
it's
Well, I
also
gotta admit, I mean,
cynical.
like Gavin Newsom is, I disagree with that guy, but he can speak. He can at least, he can, I mean,
He can
I,
put a sentence together.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
true.
yeah, 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 and he's actually a pretty good speaker.
Yeah,
Uh,
he's slick.
he's slick. He's slick. Yeah, he reminds me of Jeffrey Dahmer, like slick, like.
Yeah. No, but it's
but
what
but
is it?
but at
The
least he
Jason
is. Yeah,
Bateman, the what is it?
I
The
know.
American Psycho guy, Bateman.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. He
Yeah,
looked like
like
him.
that guy.
Yeah,
But like lizard person. But
yeah,
the thing is, um, wherever we are, it's to me, it's like, well, politicians are liars professionally. You have to be.
yeah.
Like it selects for that. So I don't tend to like to listen to that, but I do tend to like listen to
But if they get on a podcast with somebody that, like, if they're willing to sit down with somebody and just have a conversation
sure.
and usually the conversation, it's not even asking about political policies, just get to know that person. And I mean, that can be dangerous too, to vote somebody just because you like their character. I don't think we should vote for somebody's
Right.
character
Well,
or
but
not.
everybody in politics is a construct, right? They've got a
Yeah,
PR team, they've been
yeah,
drilled, they've practiced, they've polished. And it's like, you know, what was it years ago, that movie Primary Colors, where John Travolta pretends to be a Democrat candidate and he just says the truth. And everybody's
yeah,
like, what? It's like, do you Democrat Party using black people? And he's like, was there ever a doubt? Like, of course we are. Like,
yeah, yeah,
and just blows the doors off because he's saying true things. And it's an acknowledgement that all of your nonsense is scripted, even your personality, your polish, your
yeah,
picture with your wife and kids in front of your house. It's all
yeah,
um, marketing, right? And so to some extent, I think that's the why people are more attracted to Trump in some cases, because whatever he's saying, like he doesn't even know where the end of that sentence is going,
yeah,
much less
yeah,
his
yeah,
hand. But like
yeah,
he's
yeah.
just gonna say some words now, and we're all like, what's gonna be the next word? What's gonna be the
Yeah,
end of that sentence?
yeah,
Right.
yeah, no, that is, yeah, yeah, no, and that is, I mean, so I mean, in a way, yeah, I think that is the way out though, is like we slowly went into this like bite size, and it's hard to even say what, I mean, money had to do with it, like with commercials, commercial breaks, everything had to be, and then also it's
Sure.
our fault for, our attention spans. And I mean, we kind of
I
ask,
mean, limits of
I actually think we
television.
do ask for it sometimes. I mean, they're giving us what we want, and we like
Right.
bite-sized things for a long time. We kind of asked for our political leaders to be boxed in a way,
Right.
because it was easy for us to digest. And I just want to know the policies. I think in the past they probably did have long, boring debates that
Oh
nobody
yeah,
really
the
listened to
Lincoln
on.
Douglas debates.
Yeah,
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 yeah. I
yeah,
mean, the Lincoln Douglas debates were long,
yeah,
long
and yeah,
stumps,
and I think
4 hours, 8 hours, but
and
people
people,
don't have the same attention span. They don't necessarily have the same
yeah,
amount like of time
yeah. So
in
we
the
kept
same way. But
asking
it's
for
like,
smaller, but now
I'll, if I've got something to do,
just
I'll put on some podcast or commentator, whatever, or something about the Bible or whatever it is, and I'll wash the dishes or I'll sweep the
yeah.
floor or like I'll grade papers and have something in my ear, and it's like,
Wow, that's gonna be
um,
hard. You can grade papers and listen to, like, I can see classical music or something. Actually, you could have listen to a podcast and grade papers.
so it depends on what I'm grading. If it's just quizzes, I can have,
Okay, because
but if it's like, but if I have to
okay,
grade
yeah,
like an
got it.
essay, then
Yeah,
yeah, it'll
okay,
be
okay,
it'll be
okay.
music,
Okay,
something like
yeah,
that. Um, but I think you're right. There's something in us being able to dialogue these things, right? And even if what we're doing now is kind of shaky and going all over the place, I think if we keep doing this, we're gonna build out a series of figures, a series of ideas that we can reference quickly, you
Mhm.
know,
Yeah, yeah.
and that out of that you can build a map of where we are, where we're going,
Mhm.
where we've been, where we don't want to go, you know, how we want to die,
Yeah, yeah,
in a larger sense.
yeah, yeah,
Um, so I know we're nearing 3 hours here,
yeah.
but I just want to kind of, if there's a closing thought I wanted to get to, and then maybe you'll have something too, but it's the idea that my policy has been, I'm not going to say, be made to say anything I don't believe is true, right?
Yeah, that's
Um, if we can start there, there are things you think are true, there are things you're not sure are true, and there are things you know to be a lie.
mhm.
No force should be able to compel you to say things you know to be a lie. And you probably shouldn't be made to say anything that you aren't sure is, or reasonably sure is true.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and that might just be a really good heuristic for dealing with lies, in whatever form they come. If you don't have to, fight every fight or die on every hill, but certainly don't be made to say anything that betrays what you believe to be the case. Um,
Mhm.
I think that's a good first step.
Yeah. No, I like it. I like that. I mean, um, yeah, I think we'll do this again, right? And
I
have
sent you
something.
two other books. I want to talk to you about both of them.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. No, I will. We'll do those. We'll hit those in
And
order.
then
But
we're done with
you
those. I have other
mentioned,
books.
yeah, yeah, you mentioned the. Do you realize you gave you because you said the what was it? You gave me the child. You mentioned gospel singer, but it wasn't the gospel singer that you sent me. You sent me.
I sent you the gospel. Oh, I send you autobiography or the
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
biography of a
yeah,
place?
yeah, yeah, yeah. But
Oh, okay. Well,
but I could get
that's a great book. No,
okay.
read
Yeah.
that. That's his
Okay.
best
And
book.
I've already, yeah, I've actually, I was kind of reading Stoner and that at the same time, um, but yeah, no, I like that, and they give me ideas. I mean, we don't talk necessarily specifically about the book, but I think it's good. It's good to have a starting point that
Well,
and
and that doesn't mean we
build off
can't
of.
talk more about it later, right?
Yeah,
Like in a more focused way. It
yeah,
just, this is initial.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but yeah, I'm perfectly happy to send you books as long as you're happy to keep reading them. And if you want to talk about them, I'm here to talk about them.
Good. Yeah. No, yeah, this is great. So no, I love this. We'll do it again. And I like that thing you said too about just uh yeah, it doesn't matter. Once you get somebody thinking, that's it. That's all you need to do. It
Right.
doesn't really that is.
Right.
I mean, I think we
Because who can see
naturally
where that ends?
gravitate
Yeah.
to towards truth, but I never even looked at it that way. The very I mean, from a religious perspective, you can say, thought is instilled to us by God or something. I mean, those type of thing. I like referring to God as that. Those type of things are resonate with me,
Hmm.
and just the thought, just thought alone is powerful, and I think ultimately uh can get us out of this.
I
So
think you're I think you're right. I hope you're right. I pray you're right. But again, thanks for having me on. Thanks for the opportunity. It's a pleasure to see you and talk to you as always.
I'll see you soon next time. Bye
All
bye.
right. Take care.
Thank you.